Hello everyone. I am the storyteller, here to guide you through this dark tale. If you're tuning in to find peace before sleep, I encourage you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, settle in, relax your body and mind, and allow the shadows of this story to envelop you. The night had teeth. Razor sharp, invisible, sinking deeper with every breath I took. I stumbled down Madison Street, the bitter taste of rejection still clawing at my tongue like a poison-laced whiskey. The world around me tilted. Was it the alcohol or something more sinister, warping reality like a broken mirror? Street lamps hung like sickly yellow bruises on the cracked pavement, their light stretching thin and twisting grotesquely as I passed beneath. My shadow no longer mirrored my steps, it writhed and flickered, like a marionette with its strings severed, dancing to a cruel puppeteer's tune. At Murphy's pub, the woman I had hoped to speak with looked right through me, not past, not around, but through, as if I were a phantom made of smoke and shattered regrets. Her friends snickered behind hands, their laughter sharp and cruel, slicing through the smoky air. Their derision was a fresh burn, worse than the bourbon I swallowed afterward to numb the ache. Ahead, my apartment building loomed, a forbidding monolith of cold concrete and broken promises. 6 blocks of silent witness to my solitude. The October wind bit through my thin jacket, goosebumps rising along my arms, though the chill was nothing compared to the dread curling inside me. The streets were too quiet for a Friday night, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting. Then I heard it. Marcus. The voice seeped into my mind like black smoke through still water, soft and feminine, threading intimacy with something deeply wrong. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs like a frantic prisoner. It wasn't outside. It whispered inside my skull, bypassing ears, slipping directly into the shadows of my thoughts. I spun, eyes wide, scanning the empty street behind me. Nothing but skeletal trees clawing at a starless sky with arthritic fingers. Again, Marcus. Closer. The voice no longer just a whisper but a cold caress crawling behind my eyes. Familiar and yet unplaceable, it churned in my gut like rotten flesh. I pressed my palms to my temples, trying to squeeze out the sound, but it burrowed deeper still. Above me, the street lamp flickered, once, twice, then died, its electric breath sighing softly as darkness swallowed the pool of light. I forced my legs to move, faster now, footsteps echoing hollowly against the abandoned buildings that lined the street like tombstones marking a forgotten graveyard. The alcohol fog cleared, replaced by something sharp and primal, fear. One lamp went out. Then another. Then another. The lights died in sequence, snuffed out by an unseen hand, a wave of artificial night trailing my desperate flight. Each shadow left behind twisted and pulsed, as if alive, hungry. My walk turned to a jog, then a full sprint. My legs trembled, rubbery with adrenaline and exhaustion. Behind me, the popping of bulbs burning out in perfect cadence with my steps echoed like a death knell. The darkness was hunting me. Marcus, don't run. The voice now full-throated, resonating inside my hollow skull. There was a weight to it, disappointment. Like a mother scolding a child who had made a mess. The familiarity squeezed my chest with icy fingers. I knew that voice. God help me, I knew it. My breath rasped, tasting of iron and terror. The buildings leaned inward, their black windows reflecting dead eyes. Within those depths, shadows moved, shapes that didn't match my own, lurking just beyond my peripheral vision, vanishing when I dared to look directly. The city was no longer a place of refuge. It had become a predator's lair. A chill ran down my spine as I glimpsed a figure at the edge of my vision, tall, impossibly thin, face obscured by shadow, watching. Waiting. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The voice inside my head whispered again. Marcus. Closer still. I stumbled into an alley, heart pounding like thunder in my ears. The darkness thickened, swallowing the faint glow of the city behind me. A cold breath brushed my neck. I spun, but the alley was empty. Or so it seemed. A guttural whisper slithered from the blackness. "You can't hide." My skin prickled. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down, suffocating. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted, wet, slick. I looked down, crimson staining the cracked concrete, spreading like spilled ink. Panic erupted. I tried to run but felt my feet stuck, rooted to the spot by invisible chains. The voice returned, urgent, pleading. "Marcus, come back." Memories surged, a childhood long buried beneath layers of denial and pain. Faces blurred and broken promises. I realized then, I was not just being hunted. I was being called home. To something darker. Something ancient. The city itself was alive, pulsing with secrets and sins. And I was trapped within its grasp. Behind me, the shadows lengthened and twisted into grotesque shapes, faces screaming without sound, reaching, clawing. I closed my eyes, hoping to wake. But the darkness was not a dream. It was my reality. The night had teeth. And it was sinking deep. Stay with me, and we will unravel the story behind the voice, the shadows, and the haunted streets. But beware, some truths are darker than the night itself. The street stretched ahead like a narrowing tunnel, swallowing the faint glow behind me and offering nothing but a yawning abyss ahead. My apartment building remained impossibly distant, a phantom goal looming through the thickening shadows despite the steps I'd already taken. Time itself seemed to twist and warp, elastic and cruel, each second drawn out into an agonizing eternity while the darkness behind me moved with patient, deliberate hunger. Pop. Another street lamp died, its failing light extinguished with a sound like brittle glass shattering into silence. Pop. Another patch of night claimed its territory, swallowing the pavement, the walls, the very air itself. My heart pounded so fiercely I felt it hammering in my throat, a frantic percussion drowning out everything except the sharp click of my own footsteps and the soft, inexorable death of the lights. A cold sweat trickled down my back, soaking through my shirt and jacket, pressing the fabric tight against my skin like a burial shroud. The chill in the October air was nothing compared to the freezing weight settling into my bones. "You can't escape what you've done, Marcus." The words hit me like a physical blow, staggering me mid-stride. I stumbled, nearly falling, and my hand shot out, grabbing a fire hydrant to steady myself. The metal was ice, so cold it burned. The voice had shifted, no longer just familiar, but known. Intimately, terrifyingly known. Sarah. Her name unlocked a floodgate deep within my mind. Memories crashed in like a relentless tide. Months spent drowning in self-pity and whiskey, trying to erase the echo of her laugh, bright and clear like wind chimes on a summer breeze. The way she hummed old songs under her breath, soft and unguarded. The scent of her perfume lingering on pillows, even after she left. 6 months ago, she was gone. Portland. Her sister's place. Starting over, free from the dead weight of what we were, what I ruined. She couldn't be here. Couldn't be whispering inside my head with that hollow, empty voice, like an echo of an echo, twisted and broken. "You drove me away, Marcus. You and your drinking, your anger, your suffocating need." I wanted to argue, to deny it. But the words caught in my throat, sharp and jagged like fish bones. Because it was true. All of it. Jealousy, paranoia, the relentless suspicion that she'd see through me, that someone like her could never truly love someone like me. I checked her phone, followed her steps, questioned every laugh, every moment she spent away from our apartment. Ahead, the next street lamp exploded with a sound like breaking glass, plunging the street into deeper darkness. I forced myself forward, each step heavier than the last, like trudging through thick, suffocating quicksand. The darkness behind me had become a solid wall, alive, watching. Within it, shapes stirred. Tall, impossibly thin figures gliding rather than walking. Their forms flickered and shifted like smoke made flesh. You're so alone now, aren't you, Marcus? Just like you always said you'd be. The voice no longer echoed only inside my skull, it seeped from the shadows themselves, dripping from cracks in the sidewalk, curling through the spaces between buildings. It multiplied, a choir of Sarah's voices, each layered over the other in perfect, cruel unison, dripping with disappointment and a haunting affection I couldn't escape. Then, finally, my apartment building came into view. Its brick facade a lone beacon rising like a lighthouse through the storm of panic consuming me. The lobby windows glowed warm yellow, an island of light in the sea of darkness. Just 2 more blocks. Just a little farther. But the darkness was faster. It slipped and flowed around me like liquid night, severing my sight, swallowing the street, the building, the world beyond the small dying circle of light where I stood. Above me, the last street lamp flickered desperately, its bulb pulsing in frantic, uneven rhythms, like a heart on the brink of failure. From the encroaching shadows, the figures emerged. Tall, impossibly thin. Their movement was fluid, almost graceful, but it hurt to watch, like witnessing some grotesque dance of death. Their faces were voids, blank shadows broken only by eyes that caught the dim light like shards of broken glass. They didn't advance directly, but circled me slowly. Patient predators, waiting for their prey to falter. Do you remember what you said to me, Marcus? The last night we were together. I did remember. Every word. Every desperate plea. Every tear that slipped down her cheek as I screamed, raging against imagined betrayals, drowning in my own twisted insecurities. I told her no one would ever love her the way I did. That she would regret leaving. That one day she'd realize what she'd thrown away. You said I'd come back to you. And now, here I was. Coming back to the darkness. To the ghosts. To the reckoning. The night air thickened, heavy as if it carried the weight of 1,000 whispered regrets. The figures glided closer, their eyes shimmering like shards of obsidian, reflecting not just light but something darker, memories best left buried. Each breath I took felt stolen, shallow, like I was breathing through a veil of frost that dulled the edges of reality. My legs trembled beneath me, not from weakness but from the cold grip of terror curling around my spine. You promised, the chorus murmured, voices dripping with venomous sweetness, you promised you'd never leave. A surge of raw panic exploded inside me. I tried to speak, to beg for forgiveness, to explain the madness that had taken hold of me, but my throat was dry as bone. Suddenly, the ground beneath shifted, a subtle tremor that grew into a groan as cracks spiderwebbed through the pavement. From those fissures, wisps of shadow spilled out like smoke escaping a broken seal. The darkness wasn't just a void, it was alive. Hungry. A living nightmare. The cityscape twisted and warped as the figures closed in, their forms blurring into grotesque shapes, merging with the shadows until they seemed part of some ancient, malevolent entity. A cold wind howled, carrying with it a faint melody, the same song Sarah used to hum. It was hauntingly familiar and utterly wrong, like a lullaby sung by ghosts in a forgotten tongue. My mind flashed back to the night everything changed. The fight. The shattered glass. The silence after the storm. I had screamed at her, my words sharp knives cutting through the fragile bond between us. I remembered the moment she turned away, the finality in her eyes. And then, the note left on the kitchen table, short, cold. I'm sorry, Marcus. I have to find myself again. But now, that apology twisted into accusation, a chain tightening around my soul. The shadows whispered again. You will find yourself here. With us. The last flickering lamp gave a final shudder and died, plunging me into pure, suffocating darkness. In the blackness, the only sound was my ragged breathing and the slow, deliberate footsteps closing in. I was no longer running from my past. I was being swallowed by it. The darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating, swallowing every trace of the street, the distant city, the warmth of the living world. My senses reeled, distorted by fear and exhaustion. The air tasted stale, heavy with the scent of damp concrete and decay. Around me, the whispers grew louder, no longer distant echoes but sharp, insistent voices threading through my very bones. The tall, slender figures moved with unnatural grace, circling like vultures waiting for the final breath. Their hollow eyes reflected not only the faint glimmers of dying light but the fragments of my broken memories, each one a jagged shard of regret. I stumbled forward, the uneven pavement threatening to betray me at every step. My fingers brushed against a cold, wet surface, slick and sticky. I glanced down, dark crimson pooled beneath my shoes, its presence both shocking and strangely familiar, as if it were the blood of my own shattered soul. "Marcus," the voices intoned, soft and cruel, "you cannot outrun what you've bled into this world." I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, strangled by invisible hands. Panic clawed at me, sharp and urgent. I was trapped, not just by these phantom figures, but by my own sins, my own fractures. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow darker than the rest, coalescing at the edge of my vision. It took shape, a woman's silhouette, familiar yet twisted, her features obscured but hauntingly reminiscent of Sarah. She stepped forward, lips moving without sound, eyes burning with cold fire. "You left me," the apparition whispered, voice like shattered glass, "and now you'll never leave." The ground trembled beneath us. From the cracked asphalt, skeletal hands emerged, grasping upward with desperate hunger. The shadow woman reached out, her fingers brushing my cheek with an icy touch that burned deeper than any flame. Memories crashed into me, our last night together, the bitter words, the promises broken and shattered like the glass on the floor. A sudden, sharp pain exploded in my chest. I gasped, clutching at my heart as darkness closed in. The chorus of voices swelled, a symphony of sorrow and accusation. "Face what you have done. Face the darkness within." I fell to my knees, the cold concrete biting through my clothes. Tears mingled with sweat, carving trails down my dirt-streaked face. In the blackness, a single light flickered, faint but steady. Hope. Or another cruel trick of the night. I reached toward it, trembling. And as my fingers brushed the glow, the shadows surged, engulfing me completely. The city's heartbeat slowed, but its hunger remained. Marcus was no longer alone. He had become a part of the darkness. And the night had only just begun. "You said I'd realize my mistake." The shadowy figures closed in, their grotesque forms now painfully clear. Limbs stretched beyond natural bounds, joints twisting at impossible angles, bones bending where no bone should bend. Their heads tilted in ways that would snap a human neck in an instant. But it was their eyes, oh, those eyes, that shattered me. Deep pools of terrible, knowing sadness that seeped into my very soul, making my knees threaten to give way beneath the weight of their silent accusation. "Well, Marcus," the voices whispered, cold as the grave, "I came back." Then the last street lamp shattered with a sound like a gunshot, plunging everything into absolute blackness. Yet even in this void, I could see them, the figures glowing faintly, as if lit from within by some dark, unnatural light. They formed a perfect circle, their mirrored eyes reflecting nothing but void and despair. And in the center, something new began to coalesce. Smaller, more human in shape. The curve of shoulders, the tilt of a head, the familiar outline of a profile etched in shadow and sorrow. Sarah. But not the Sarah I once knew. This apparition was translucent, flickering like heat on pavement, her eyes black holes consuming all light. When she smiled, it was a grim and terrible thing, too many teeth, sharp as shards of glass. "You wanted me to come back, didn't you?" she said, voice low and laced with cruel mockery. "You wanted to realize what you lost." I tried to speak, to beg, to explain, to apologize, but my throat closed as if invisible hands had wrapped tight around it, squeezing the breath from my lungs. Fear wasn't just inside me anymore, it was a crushing presence, sitting heavy on my chest like a lead shroud. "Well, here I am, Marcus. And I do realize." She stepped forward, silent on the cracked pavement, each step making her more real, more dangerous. Her scent filled the air, the faint floral perfume that haunted our apartment long after she was gone. "I lost my peace," she whispered, "my sleep, my safety. You took it all with your obsession, your need to possess, not to love." The circle of shadows tightened, closing around me like the iris of a camera narrowing focus on its subject. I spun, desperate for escape, but the darkness was absolute, pressing in from every direction. Then, her voice was right behind me, cold as a winter gust, breath brushing my neck. I turned slowly, knowing horror waited inches away. Her face was mere inches from mine. I counted flecks of gold trapped in her deep black eyes. But those were not her eyes. They were tunnels, bottomless voids opening into something ancient, vast, and ravenous. And then the truth crashed over me, brutal and cold as ice water. I'm not real. The street lamps flickered back on in reverse sequence, light flooding the street, banishing the shadows until only ordinary darkness remained, nothing more than nightfall's familiar cloak beneath parked cars and doorways. I was alone. Just a drunken, broken man 3 blocks from home. My hands trembled so violently I struggled to pull my keys free. My mouth tasted sour, bitter whiskey and emptiness. No shadow circle. No impossible Sarah with her mirror eyes and wicked smile. Just me. Talking to ghosts conjured by guilt and regret. But as I stumbled home, her voice echoed in the spaces between my thoughts, soft, sad, endlessly disappointed. "I'm not real, Marcus. But your guilt is. And it's been waiting for you to come home." The apartment building's entrance blazed under harsh security lights, casting every crack and scar into sharp relief. Fumbling with the lock, I caught my reflection in the glass door. For a flicker of time, I wasn't alone. Behind me stood a figure, tall, thin, grotesquely wrong. Its mirror eyes reflected me, small, shattered, drowning in the poison of my own making. The door clicked open. I stumbled inside, into the blessed, sterile normalcy of the lobby. Behind me, the street lay empty, lit by steady lamps casting only ordinary shadows. But I knew. The darkness waited. And so did my guilt. The lobby's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too sterile, a harsh contrast to the shadows that clung to my skin. My hand still trembled uncontrollably as I dropped my keys into the faded welcome mat, every sound amplified in the sudden silence that swallowed the space. I glanced back through the glass doors, half expecting to see the twisted figure looming there, waiting. But the sidewalk was empty, devoid of menace, bathed in the banal glow of functioning street lamps. Yet, beneath the surface, something stirred. A subtle shift in the air, a faint whisper beneath the hum of electricity. I moved toward the elevator, the weight of the day, and nights before, pressing down like chains tightening with each step. My reflection in the polished metal doors fractured, a fractured man shattered into shards of himself. The elevator dinged open, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the 4th floor, the threshold to solitude, or perhaps oblivion. As the doors slid shut, the lights flickered once, twice, then extinguished entirely. Pitch black. My breath hitched. In that absolute darkness, I felt it, a presence beside me. Cold. Heavy. Waiting. A voice, barely audible, whispered from the void. "Welcome back, Marcus." The elevator shuddered, and when the lights blazed back, I was no longer alone. Behind me stood Sarah, or something wearing her face. Her eyes, black holes swirling with silent fury, locked onto mine. The door dinged open prematurely, spilling me into the dim hallway. I bolted, heart hammering, feet pounding against the faded carpet as memories and shadows collided in a frenzied storm inside my mind. My apartment door was ahead, familiar yet alien. I fumbled with the lock, hands slick with sweat, and as it clicked open, the air shifted. Inside, the room was awash with moonlight filtering through torn curtains. But the furniture was gone, stripped away like the remnants of my fractured sanity. And in the center, standing where my life once lived, was Sarah. Not the woman I loved, but a specter of accusation, pain, and vengeance. Her voice echoed, layered with every tear, every scream, every broken promise. You left me in the dark, Marcus. Now you'll stay there, with me. The walls seemed to close in. The shadows writhed. And the night, hungry, eternal, claimed me once again. The air inside the apartment grew colder with every breath I took, the familiar scent of stale whiskey and forgotten dreams replaced by a damp, earthy rot. The floor beneath my feet seemed to pulse, as if the very walls were alive, breathing, watching, waiting. Sarah's translucent form glided closer, her hollow eyes locking onto mine with a piercing intensity that pierced through the fog of my mind. You left me, she whispered, voice like shattered glass scraping across a tombstone. But I never left you. I tried to retreat, but the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening finality. The lock clicked, sealing me inside with the ghosts of my past. The room twisted and contorted, the ceiling stretched high above, then collapsed inward, leaving me trapped in a shrinking nightmare. The shadows flickered and danced, forming grotesque shapes, twisted faces of sorrow and rage that whispered my failings in voices I knew too well. A cold hand brushed my shoulder, icy and unforgiving. I spun around, but no one was there, only the lingering echo of a lament. Your guilt feeds us, Marcus, the chorus murmured, it binds you to this place, to us. The air thickened until I could barely breathe. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as memories flooded back, the fights, the broken promises, the nights lost to bitterness and blame. Sarah reached out once more, her smile splitting her pale face into a grotesque mask of teeth and shadow. Face me, she demanded. Face what you've become. Tears blurred my vision as I sank to my knees, the weight of regret crushing me from within. The apartment dissolved around me into a void of endless darkness, broken only by the faint glow of those mirrored eyes, endless, accusing, inescapable. I screamed into the void, but no sound emerged, only silence. And then, a whisper. Only when you forgive yourself will you be free. The silence pressed in on me like a suffocating shroud. The cold void around Sarah's ghostly form seemed to absorb even my frantic breaths. Her voice, the echo of 1,000 broken memories, lingered in the air, a haunting refrain. Only when you forgive yourself will you be free. The words struck a chord deep within, a faint glimmer of hope amid the crushing darkness. But the weight of guilt was a tether too strong to break with mere words. I struggled to rise, knees scraping against the cold floor, trembling hands reaching out into the emptiness. My reflection flickered in the shards of shattered glass scattered across the floor, fractured fragments of a broken man searching for light. The shadows began to recede, the room stretching back into the familiar confines of my apartment. Yet, the air remained heavy with sorrow and unresolved pain. Sarah's presence softened, her eyes losing some of their fierce hunger, replaced by a fragile vulnerability. I never wanted to haunt you, she whispered, voice barely audible. I only wanted you to remember, to change. I swallowed hard, tears mixing with sweat, feeling the first real stirrings of remorse and clarity. But the journey ahead was uncertain, the path winding through darkness and self-forgiveness, haunted by the ghosts of what once was. As dawn's pale light crept through the window, I knew this was only the beginning. The first pale light of dawn seeped weakly through the cracked blinds, but it did little to dispel the chill that clung to the apartment's air. The heavy silence was fractured not by hope, but by a subtle, sinister shift. The shadows refused to retreat, instead, they thickened, gathering like smoke around the edges of the room. I blinked, and the familiar walls seemed to ripple, as if breathing, pulsating with a slow, unnatural rhythm. The apartment was no longer just a space but a threshold, a gate between worlds both seen and unseen. A soft tapping began at the window, a slow, deliberate rhythm. I hesitated, then pulled back the curtain. Outside, the street was empty. Yet, the pavement was stained with something dark, glistening faintly in the early light. Not water. Not blood, something older, something that seemed to writhe beneath the surface. From the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement, a shadow detached itself from the building across the street. It elongated, twisted, a malformed silhouette that didn't quite obey the laws of nature. The air thickened again, and a voice whispered, this time not inside my head, but around me. Marcus, you've only scratched the surface. The room darkened suddenly, plunging me into blackness. And then, there was a presence, cold and vast, like an ancient watcher awakening. I felt it before I saw it, a pressure in my chest, a suffocating weight that stole my breath and twisted my vision. Then, in the depths of the darkness, two pinpricks of light glowed, eyes staring, unblinking and endless. They belonged to something older than grief, older than guilt. Something that had been waiting, lurking just beyond the veil of my fractured mind. The apartment door creaked open slowly, though I hadn't moved. A whisper curled around me like smoke. The past is not done with you, Marcus. And neither am I. The mystery had deepened. The shadows were no longer merely reflections of my torment, they were the heralds of a darker truth, one that reached beyond my broken memories and into something ancient and unknowable. The shadows thickened, curling and coiling like living smoke as the presence drew nearer, an ancient force older than memory itself, whispering secrets long buried beneath layers of time and regret. Marcus stood frozen, heart pounding in his chest, as the darkness seemed to pulse with a slow, dreadful rhythm. From the depths of the void, two pinpricks of light emerged, unblinking eyes that burned with cold fire, staring into the very core of his soul. The air grew heavy, suffocating, as the whisper wound tighter around him. The past is not done with you, Marcus. And neither am I. A cold breath brushed his neck, and he shuddered. In that moment, the veil between worlds thinned, revealing glimpses of shadows beyond shadows, echoes of forgotten sorrows, restless spirits bound by unseen chains, and the faint outlines of a city older than time itself. Marcus's journey had only just begun. The oppressive presence lingered in the air, its cold tendrils weaving around Marcus like unseen chains tightening with every breath. Each heartbeat echoed like a drum in the vast emptiness within him, a frantic rhythm warning of the encroaching void. He staggered forward, eyes wide but searching, desperate for any anchor to reality. The walls around him seemed to pulse and breathe, shadows dancing with malicious intent, twisting familiar shapes into grotesque parodies. Every corner of the apartment whispered secrets he was too terrified to hear, yet too haunted to ignore. A flicker of movement caught his eye, an indistinct figure, barely more than a silhouette, drifting just beyond the edge of vision. It moved with unnatural grace, slipping between walls and furniture, always just out of reach. The darkness was no longer a backdrop, it was an active predator. Marcus's voice was hoarse, raw from silence and fear. What do you want from me? The shadows answered with a chorus of voices, fragmented memories, regrets, and accusations, all overlapping, drowning out reason. Among them, Sarah's voice rose above the rest, soft yet biting, reminding him of the love lost and the mistakes etched deep within his soul. His hands trembled as he reached out, not knowing whether he sought to grasp her or to banish the specter forever. But the darkness only deepened, folding around him like a living shroud, pulling him toward its cold heart. In this battle, Marcus was no longer just fighting ghosts of the past, he was fighting the abyss within himself, his guilt, his fears, his loneliness, manifested into a relentless, suffocating force. And in the depths of that struggle, he faced a terrifying question. Could he find the strength to confront his own darkness before it consumed him completely? The air in the apartment grew colder still, the shadows pressing tighter as if to suffocate the very light from Marcus's soul. Just as the darkness seemed ready to swallow him whole, an abrupt, sharp knock shattered the oppressive silence. It echoed through the empty rooms, urgent, insistent. Marcus froze, heart hammering wildly. Who could be here? At this hour? A sliver of panic pierced the fog of his despair. Another knock, louder this time, followed by a low voice calling softly, "Marcus?" "It's me, Evelyn." The name stirred something fragile within him, a flicker of warmth in the frozen dark. Evelyn. His sister. The one who had never given up on him, despite everything. He hesitated, then stumbled toward the door, fingers fumbling with the lock. As the door swung open, the harsh yellow light of the hallway spilled in, pushing back shadows like a sudden dawn. Evelyn stood there, face etched with worry but eyes blazing with determination. "I've been worried," she said, stepping inside without waiting. "You've been disappearing into yourself, Marcus. You have to fight this, whatever it is." Her presence was a lifeline, pulling him back from the edge. The darkness recoiled, shrinking just enough to let a breath of hope slip through. But as she crossed the threshold, a chill ran down Marcus's spine. The room around him seemed to shift subtly, shadows lengthening, eyes watching unseen. Something was still waiting. Something that knew Marcus was not yet free. Evelyn reached out, taking his trembling hands in hers. "We'll face this together," she promised. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could fight back. The moment Evelyn stepped fully into the apartment, a subtle shift rippled through the air, imperceptible to her warm, steady presence but unmistakable to Marcus's haunted senses. The shadows recoiled, folding into tighter corners, yet from the deepest recesses, a pair of eyes ignited, a cold, unblinking gaze that pierced the dim light like shards of ice. This lurking force had waited long before Marcus's guilt first clawed its way into consciousness. It thrived in silence and sorrow, feeding on fractured souls who dared to confront their pasts. It was neither fully spirit nor flesh, but a remnant of something far older, an ancient watcher tethered to the city's forgotten sins. As Evelyn spoke softly, urging Marcus toward hope, the watcher stirred, its attention now sharpened. The air grew heavy, thickening with an almost tangible malevolence, as if the walls themselves breathed with dark intent. From the shadows near the ceiling, a shape began to take form, a towering silhouette with limbs too long, joints bent at unnatural angles. Its face was hidden, but Marcus felt its gaze burn into him, a silent promise of reckoning yet to come. The watcher was patient, knowing that the seeds of despair and fear within Marcus would one day bloom fully. But it also understood the fragile human heart, that light could flicker even in the deepest darkness. And so it waited. Watching. Hunting. Ready to claim what it believed owed. Marcus could sense it lurking just beyond Evelyn's comforting embrace, a cold breath on the back of his neck, a whisper in the silence. The true battle was far from over. But I knew, with the cold certainty that comes from staring too long into the dark corners of your own soul, that somewhere out there, in the fragile spaces between what's real and what we fear might be real, something was still calling my name. And someday, when I was drunk enough, desperate enough, or just utterly tired of carrying the weight of what I'd done, I might be tempted to answer. The interstate stretched ahead like a black ribbon torn straight from the night sky, its edges dissolving into a darkness that seemed to breathe, inhale, exhale, in rhythms that felt almost alive. My headlights carved out a pitiful cone of visibility in the suffocating void, barely reaching 50 yards before the shadows devoured everything whole. The dashboard clock glowed 2:47 a.m., its green numbers floating in the cabin like dying stars in a forgotten constellation. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight, pushing through a suffocating exhaustion that made my eyelids heavy as lead curtains. The bitter metallic tang of the last gas station coffee still coated my tongue, a rust-flavored reminder of my desperation. My fingers ached from gripping the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white as bone in the dim glow of the dashboard. Route 184 was a forgotten artery slicing through the belly of nowhere, connecting two towns so small that most maps didn't bother with them. No street lights, no reflectors, just cracked asphalt and the occasional rusted guardrail dissolving into ravines too deep and dark to see. It was the kind of road that seemed to phase in and out of reality depending on how desperate you were to find it. And that's when I noticed the sedan. It appeared in my rearview mirror like a thought I couldn't shake, its headlights two yellow eyes boring deep into the back of my skull. The distance between us remained constant, maybe 50 yards, close enough that I could just make out the boxy outline of an older model, though the darkness swallowed all details. Its lights never wavered. Never blinked. Just stayed there, tethered to my bumper by some invisible cable. I eased off the accelerator. The speedometer needle drifted down from 70 to 65. The sedan slowed with me, keeping that perfect, unsettling distance. I pushed back down, trying to outrun the growing unease, nudging the needle back to 75. But the yellow eyes stayed glued in place, watching. A cold prickle crept up my spine, as if icy fingers traced my vertebrae one by one. My heart picked up its rhythm, no longer a steady drum but a frantic staccato. I told myself it was just coincidence. Whoever was behind me was probably just as tired, using my tail lights to guide them through this endless blackness. But coincidence, I knew, had its limits. Signaling left, I shifted into the passing lane, though there was nothing to pass except empty road and the ghosts of roadkill that flickered in and out of my headlights. The sedan didn't follow immediately. For a terrifying moment, the mirror held only darkness, and relief rushed through me like a warm tide. My shoulders relaxed, breath slowing. Then, without warning, the headlights reappeared. Not behind me. Not beside me. Just there. As if they had never moved. The same distance. The same unwavering stare. My breath caught sharp in my throat, echoing in the cramped space of my car like a sudden gasp underwater. I blinked hard, blaming exhaustion and the notorious highway hypnosis for playing tricks on my mind, time skipping like a scratched record, images blurring. But when my eyes snapped open again, the sedan was still there. Still watching. My palms slickened against the steering wheel, leaving damp prints on the worn leather. The air conditioning hummed coldly, but the cabin felt stifling, like the oxygen was being slowly siphoned away, as if the night itself was drawing breath. I cracked the window just a fraction, and a rush of cold night air spilled in with the sound of wind rustling dead leaves, though no trees were near. Moving back into the right lane, I stared intently into the rearview mirror, the intensity of a man waiting for his fate. Then the sedan's headlights flickered once, like an eye blinking. And vanished. Behind me stretched empty road, black as the bottom of a well. My heart hammered violently, each beat a thunderclap pounding in my temples. I counted silently, 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, waiting for those sinister eyes to reappear. Nothing. Just the dull red glow of my own tail lights reflected off the guardrail. Relief poured through me like warm water. Then, an unbearable wave of embarrassment. Because I knew. I wasn't safe. Not yet. And whatever was out there, lurking in the black, was patient. Waiting. The road stretched on endlessly, the darkness swallowing everything beyond the thin sliver of headlights. My pulse rattled like a storm inside my chest, each beat a frantic drum signaling an unspoken warning. The absence of that sinister gaze behind me was a cruel silence, too quiet, too deliberate. I pressed harder on the accelerator, the engine roaring in protest as I pushed the car faster into the abyss. The tires hummed against the cracked asphalt, but no matter how far I sped, the road seemed to twist and warp beneath me, dragging me deeper into the void. Then, just as exhaustion threatened to swallow my senses whole, the radio crackled, a burst of static, then a faint voice. It was distorted, distant, but unmistakably a voice calling my name. Marcus. I slammed my hand onto the dial, hunting for the source, but the signal broke apart, fading into white noise. The words echoed in my mind like a ghostly echo, chilling and impossible to place. Suddenly, the headlights appeared again in the rearview mirror, closer this time, their yellow glare burning like embers in the darkness. The sedan wasn't just following, it was closing in, relentless and patient. Panic surged. I swerved briefly, heart hammering, but the car behind matched every movement flawlessly, never losing ground. It was no ordinary driver, no human tired and lost on a forgotten road. The shadows beyond the windshield shifted unnaturally, shapes flickering just at the edge of perception, faces distorted in agony, hands reaching out, grasping for salvation or perhaps damnation. My breath quickened. The car's interior felt suddenly colder, the air thick with a presence I couldn't see but could feel pressing against my skin like icy fingers. A voice whispered from the darkness, barely audible but laden with menace. "Turn back, Marcus. The road does not forgive." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles widening. Somewhere deep inside, a primal terror told me this was more than a chase, it was a reckoning. And the night was far from over. The sedan was no ordinary car. It was a vessel, an echo of a past long buried beneath the twisted roots of the land Marcus now traversed. Decades ago, Route 184 was the stage for tragedies whispered only in hushed tones, the site of disappearances, mysterious crashes, and souls lost to the void between worlds. Locals spoke of the Watcher in the yellow lights, a spectral guardian cursed to roam the black ribbon of asphalt, forever tethered to the memories of those who never made it home. The entity was born from grief and vengeance, a shadow born of countless restless spirits bound by unresolved guilt and sorrow. It took form in the shape of a rusted sedan, frozen in time, headlights glowing like the eyes of the damned, forever chasing those who carry their own darkness too close. Some said the Watcher sought to warn, others that it hungered to reclaim souls consumed by despair. Marcus's own fractured past and simmering guilt had marked him, a beacon in the night for the ancient force's relentless pursuit. The entity's eyes, those unblinking yellow lights, reflected not just the present, but the endless corridors of regret stretching back through time. To face it was to confront the shadows within oneself, to reckon with the sins that refused to fade. And until that reckoning was complete, the Watcher would not relent. It would follow. Waiting patiently. Hungry for the moment Marcus's resolve faltered. Marcus's hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles ghostly white as the night thickened around him. The weight of unseen eyes bore down like a shroud, and the haunted hum of the engine was drowned beneath the relentless rhythm of his racing heart. He knew, with an aching certainty, that the Watcher was no mere specter of the road, it was tethered to him, bound by threads woven from the fabric of his past. Long before this desolate stretch of asphalt existed, Marcus's family had called this land home. Generations had whispered secrets into the soil, dark bargains made beneath ancient trees, echoes of blood and sorrow seeping into the earth itself. A tragedy long ago had fractured the family, a night stained by fire and loss, one that left wounds unseen but deeply felt. It was that night, Marcus realized, that the Watcher had been born, a sentinel forged from the pain and guilt of those who had vanished into the darkness. The sedan's headlights, glowing like twin orbs of judgment, reflected more than just the present. They illuminated the corridors of memory, a labyrinth of mistakes, betrayals, and silenced screams. The Watcher was the embodiment of those shadows, hunting not just for souls, but for redemption, for acknowledgement of the sins buried beneath layers of denial. Marcus felt the weight of the past pressing down, the fractured relationship with his brother, the silent grief of a lost childhood friend, and the choices that had set this relentless force upon his trail. To escape the Watcher, he knew he would have to confront not only the specter but himself. The night whispered around him, the air thick with unseen eyes and the breath of the forgotten. The road ahead seemed endless, but Marcus understood that the true journey was inward, through the darkness of his own soul, to face the truths he had long evaded. And only then, perhaps, could he hope to silence the relentless yellow gaze behind him. The night closed in tighter, the cold pressing like a vice around Marcus's chest as the highway stretched endlessly ahead. Every muscle tensed, every sense sharpened to a razor's edge. The haunting glow of the sedan's headlights lingered behind him, constant, unyielding. Ahead, the road twisted sharply, a forgotten bend veiled in dense fog that seemed to crawl from the earth itself. As Marcus rounded the curve, his headlights caught something flickering in the mist, a figure standing motionless by the roadside, pale and fragile in the silver wash. His breath caught. The figure raised a hand, beckoning silently. Marcus slowed, heart pounding as the car rolled to a stop mere feet away. Through the veil of fog, the Watcher revealed itself, not the sedan now, but a shape of shifting shadows, tall and elongated, its eyes twin orbs burning with ancient sorrow. The air turned brittle, charged with silent screams and whispered regrets. The figure spoke, not with words, but a crushing wave of memories flooding Marcus's mind, childhood laughter twisted into screams, promises broken in firelight, a brother lost to anger, and a friend vanished into the night. "This is your reckoning," the presence breathed. Marcus's knees buckled, but he forced himself upright, tears burning as guilt and fear coalesced into determination. "I'm not running anymore," he whispered. The watcher's eyes glowed brighter, an unspoken challenge hanging heavy in the mist. The road ahead was dark, but Marcus understood now, he must face the shadows within to survive the darkness without. The cold mist wrapped around Marcus like a shroud, the weight of the watcher's presence pressing into his very bones. Every memory the shadow sent crashing through his mind was a jagged shard of pain, each one threatening to shatter the fragile resolve he had barely mustered. But something deep inside stirred, a flicker of defiance, a fragile ember of hope. "I'm not running anymore," Marcus whispered again, voice trembling but resolute. The watcher's eyes, those endless pools of ancient sorrow, held his gaze, unblinking and inscrutable. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it extended a long, skeletal hand toward him. The mist swirled between them, cold tendrils weaving a bridge between past and present. "You must remember," the presence intoned, its voice both distant and intimate, "or be lost forever." Marcus felt himself pulled into the tide of memories, visions of a fire that tore through his childhood home, screams that echoed in the night, a brother's furious betrayal, and a friend who vanished without trace. Each scene was a wound reopened, but also a thread leading to truth. Through the haze, a name surfaced, Evelyn. His sister's voice broke through the tempest of guilt, calling him back from the brink. "I'm here," she whispered, "and I won't let you face this alone." The mist began to lift, the shadow's grip loosening just enough for Marcus to breathe. He stepped forward, meeting the watcher's gaze with newfound strength. "I will remember. I will face what I have hidden." The watcher's form shimmered, fading slowly into the fog, but its eyes remained, a silent promise lingering in the cold night air. The road ahead was still dark, the journey far from over. But for the first time in years, Marcus felt the faintest glimmer of light. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I stepped inside the gas station, a harsh contrast to the oppressive darkness I'd just fled. The air inside was stale, thick with the faint hum of buzzing insects and the faint smell of burnt coffee. My hands trembled uncontrollably, and I struggled to steady my breathing as I approached the counter. The clerk's eyes, sunken and hollow, locked onto me with a gaze that felt unsettlingly perceptive, like he could see straight through the veneer I tried to maintain. He didn't speak at first, just watched me as though waiting for some inevitable collapse. I forced a shaky smile. "Long night," I managed, voice hoarse. He nodded slowly, his gaze never wavering. "A lot of people come through here at this hour, usually running from something." I swallowed hard, the bitter taste of blood still thick on my tongue. "Yeah," I said, "something like that." Behind me, the hum of the fluorescent lights flickered again, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement in the reflection of the glass door, a shadow too dark to be cast by any normal thing. The clerk leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not the first to see the sedan on Route 184. It's been following travelers for years. Some say it's a warning. Others say it's something far worse." I shivered, remembering the hollow, cataract-tinted eyes that seemed to burn with some ancient hunger. "Most just disappear," he continued. "Or come back changed. You're lucky to have shaken it off." I nodded, though the truth was I didn't feel lucky at all. The clock on the wall ticked forward, the seconds dragging as the shadows outside seemed to pulse, waiting. And somewhere deep in my mind, that haunting certainty whispered again, this was far from over. The clerk's gaze lingered on me, heavy with unspoken knowledge. The faint flicker of the buzzing fluorescent lights cast long shadows across his gaunt face, deepening the hollows beneath his tired eyes. For a moment, silence stretched between us, a silence thick with the weight of too many stories left untold. "I've seen plenty come through here," he said finally, voice low and gravelly, travelers chased by things that don't belong in the daylight. You're not the first to run from those yellow eyes. I swallowed hard, the metallic taste of blood still sharp on my tongue. Why do they follow? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. The clerk shook his head slowly, as if carrying a burden too heavy for words. No one knows for sure. Some say it's a curse born from old sins, from secrets buried beneath these roads. Others think it's a warning, an omen for those who refuse to reckon with their past. He leaned closer, lowering his voice even further. But be careful, friend. That sedan, it doesn't just follow. It learns. It waits for the cracks in your mind to grow wide enough to slip inside. My hands clenched into fists, knuckles white against the counter. A chill crawled up my spine as I glanced nervously at the windows, half expecting to see those ominous yellow lights waiting outside. I hesitated, have you seen anyone get away? The clerk's eyes darkened, and he nodded once. A few. But they never come back the same. The road changes them, drags pieces of their soul away in the night. I forced a shaky breath, trying to steady the trembling in my limbs. What should I do? He reached under the counter, pulling out a worn, creased map of the area. With a trembling finger, he traced a path, a route that veered far from the interstate, through dense forests and forgotten trails. If you want to lose it, he said, voice grave, you take the old way. But remember, the Watcher doesn't just hunt the road. It hunts the mind. Outside, the night seemed to pulse, as if alive, waiting for my next move. I pocketed the map, feeling the weight of the unknown settle deep inside me. The journey was far from over. The flickering fluorescent light above the gas station seemed to hum with a strange resonance as Marcus pocketed the worn map. The clerk's words lingered like a shadow, the Watcher doesn't just hunt the road. It hunts the mind. Marcus's thoughts spiraled back, unraveling threads he had tried so desperately to bury. The Watcher, the relentless sedan, was more than a ghost of the highway. It was woven into the very fabric of his past, a specter born from the fractures of his own history. Years ago, before exhaustion had worn him thin and the night became his tormentor, Marcus had lived a different life. A life filled with family gatherings, childhood laughter, and secrets whispered behind closed doors. But those memories were stained with darker moments, an accident on a night much like this one, a lost friend who vanished without explanation, and a silence that swallowed the truth. The sedan's yellow eyes were the embodiment of guilt, a mirror reflecting not just what Marcus feared but what he refused to face, the pain, the mistakes, the betrayals. The Watcher was not merely an external force but a manifestation of the unresolved sins that clung to him like a second skin. Each chase, each relentless pursuit down the desolate road, was a cruel reminder, a spectral reckoning of choices made and lives shattered. The road was a loop, an endless corridor where past and present collided, and the Watcher was the gatekeeper, demanding acknowledgement. Marcus realized that escaping the Watcher meant confronting those buried memories, peeling back layers of denial to find the heart of the darkness. Only by facing the truths long hidden could he hope to break the cycle. And as the night deepened outside the gas station, a cold whisper echoed through his mind, urging him forward into the shadows of his own history. I described the sedan to the clerk, my words tumbling over each other in urgent bursts, trying to capture every detail, the oval headlights with their faint blue cataract-like edges, the black grille like a mouth filled with chrome teeth, the impossibly perfect distance it held behind me. He listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, but his expression revealed nothing. After a long silence, he told me about the accident on Route 184, 15 years ago. During a violent storm, a sedan had lost control, smashed through the guardrail, and vanished into one of the black ravines alongside the road. Neither the car nor the driver was ever found. Since then, people reported seeing strange headlights late at night, lights that behaved unnaturally, appearing and disappearing without warning. I bought a cup of coffee, hands still shaking, and sat in my car beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The warmth was a small comfort, but the world felt less solid, fractured with gaps where impossible things might slip through. When I finally steeled myself to continue, I took back roads, avoiding Route 184 entirely. Yet every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I expected those haunting oval headlights to materialize from the void. They never did that night, but the feeling of being watched never fully left. Months later, I still catch myself checking the mirror too often, heart racing whenever headlights hold a suspiciously perfect distance behind me. Deep inside, I know the sedan still waits, patient, unyielding, searching for the perfect moment, the right darkness, the isolated road to resume its chase. Sometimes, when the moon is hidden and the roads lie empty, I wonder if it's following someone else now, or if it's waiting for me to make one wrong turn, back onto Route 184. The thought makes my palms sweat and breath catch. But it also fills me with a terrible certainty: next time, I won't be lucky enough to find an exit. Some nights, the darkness between one heartbeat and the next stretches long enough to swallow reason whole. This was one of those nights. Rain hammered my windshield for over an hour when Rex started whining from the back seat, his bladder with its terrible timing. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder of Highway 47, a lonely stretch cutting through dense pine forest so thick it seemed to swallow sound itself. My headlights sliced through sheets of rain, illuminating only slick pavement and ghostly tree trunks pressing close to the road. My hands trembled slightly as I shifted into park. The gas station coffee was stronger than I expected, leaving my nerves raw, my heart pounding faster than normal. Rex scratched at the door, claws scraping vinyl with that fingernails on a chalkboard sound that made my teeth ache. I stepped out immediately into the downpour, cold water soaking my jacket and running down my neck. The air smelled of wet earth, and something else. Something foul and organic, like vegetables left too long in a dank basement. Rex bounded out after me, disappearing eagerly into the darkness beyond the headlight beams. Then I saw him. Standing about 20 feet ahead, caught in the harsh white glare of my high beams, was a tall figure draped in a long dark overcoat reaching past his knees. The fabric was so black it seemed to swallow the light around it. Water should have been streaming off him, but there was none. His face was hidden in shadow despite the brightness aimed directly at him, as if the light simply refused to touch his features. My breath caught in my throat. The logical part of my brain scrambled for explanations: a hitchhiker, a stranded traveler, a Samaritan offering help. But out here, logic felt stretched thin, fragile against the weight of something fundamentally wrong. I called out, voice barely audible over the storm, asking if he needed assistance. He didn't respond. He didn't move. He stood like a monument to stillness while the rain screamed around him. The rain hammered harder, drumming a relentless rhythm on the roof of my car and the hood where water pooled and slid in rivulets. The figure remained motionless, an impenetrable silhouette against the stark light. My voice cracked as I called out again, louder this time, "Hey. Are you alright? Do you need help?" No response. Only the storm answered. Rex, sensing my unease, growled low and deep from the back seat. I could feel the tension coil within him like a spring ready to snap. His claws scraped louder against the door, frantic now. I took a hesitant step forward, boots sinking slightly into the gravel shoulder. The air smelled heavier here, saturated with damp pine and that unsettling organic rot. I forced myself to peer closer, trying to make out any hint of a face beneath the brim of a soaked hat, or the collar of that endless black coat. But the figure was a void. No features, no eyes reflecting the light. Just darkness swallowing everything. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. A sound like the scraping of nails on stone filled the space between us. Rex barked, a sharp, furious sound that cut through the storm. The figure tilted its head slowly, a movement so deliberate and unnatural it sent a spike of pure terror through me. I stumbled back toward the car, heart pounding so fiercely it drowned out the rain. Slamming the door shut behind me, I locked it without looking back. The engine roared to life, tires spinning wet gravel as I peeled away, the dark figure standing still until the headlights faded. But the feeling followed me, a cold breath on the back of my neck, an imprint of something older and far more malevolent than any storm. The pounding of my heart echoed louder than the rain against the roof, each beat a frantic drum deep within my chest. The jittery caffeine buzz twisted with something primal, an ancient, icy fear that crawled beneath my skin and raised the hairs along my arms, even beneath my soaked jacket sleeves. Reflexively, I reached up and clicked the high beams down to regular headlights, hoping to spare the figure's eyes, to break the tension somehow. The moment I did, he vanished. Just like that. Gone as if he'd never been there at all. I stood frozen for what must have been seconds, though it felt like minutes. Rain streamed down my face, mingling with my ragged breaths that puffed tiny clouds in the humid summer air. My eyes fixed on the empty asphalt, the exact spot he'd been standing. Rex bounded back from the tree line, shaking water from his thick coat and looking up at me with the blissful satisfaction of a dog who'd done his business. Completely unaware of the impossible thing I just witnessed. Dogs were supposed to sense these things, weren't they? Supernatural presences, malevolent entities, whatever the hell that was. Shaken, I shuffled slowly toward the front of my car, shoes squelching in the wet gravel. The headlights illuminated nothing but endless road and the soft patter of falling rain. Then, a knot tightened in my stomach. On the hood of my car were footprints, fresh mud, still glistening wet beneath the pale light. The prints were enormous, size 13 or 14 boots, and they led from the exact spot the figure had occupied, right up to my vehicle. But they didn't stop at the bumper. The muddy tracks climbed the hood itself, as if someone had used it like a ramp. The mud hadn't been there when I stopped, hadn't been there when I stepped out. Now, clear and undeniable. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone to capture the evidence. But no matter how many times I pressed the power button, the screen remained pitch black. Dead. Impossible, since it was at 60% not long ago. Through the windshield, Rex watched me with those deep, knowing brown eyes, eyes that reflected far more understanding than any dog should. I climbed back inside, clothes dripping onto the upholstery, and sat for a moment, mind racing to process the impossible. Logic unraveled. Hitchhikers didn't vanish with the flick of headlights. They didn't leave footprints on car hoods. They didn't stand in pouring rain without so much as a single drop touching them. My fingers shook as I started the engine, pulling back onto the highway. Now every shadow beyond my headlights seemed alive, hiding figures in long coats. Every reflection in my mirrors whispered the possibility of him, standing just out of sight, silently following. The rain no longer sounded like rain. It tapped on the roof of my car, hundreds of fingers drumming in a rhythm almost matching my racing heartbeat, but just slightly off, a syncopated percussion that sent shivers crawling across my skin. Miles passed. The landscape warped and looped, the same bend, the same pine clusters, the same dented guardrail. Was I driving in circles? Impossible on this straight highway. Unless the road itself had shifted. Unless reality was bending. My mouth dried to dust. I reached for the water bottle in the cup holder, then froze halfway. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse. Rex sat alert and calm, but behind him, a flash of a tall figure in a dark overcoat, still as stone, occupying the far corner of the back seat. I whipped my head around, desperate to see. Nothing. Just Rex. Just empty upholstery. Turning back, the mirror showed only my dog and the reflection of my own spiraling paranoia. The speedometer read 65. But time felt thick, like molasses, stretching, contracting, slipping beyond grasp. The oppressive weight in the car thickened, a silence so profound it pressed into my ears, muffling even the rhythmic patter of rain. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles whitening as I forced my gaze to stay on the road ahead, though every instinct screamed to look back again. Rex shifted beside me, alert but unnervingly calm, his eyes flicking briefly to the empty passenger seat behind. That fleeting glance seemed almost purposeful, as if he saw what I could not. The darkness outside deepened, swallowing the highway into an endless void. My breath fogged the windows, a visible testament to the chill settling in my bones. The tapping on the roof resumed, irregular now, like cautious fingers hesitating, then striking with deliberate intent. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, static screeching through the speakers before a faint, distorted voice whispered. "Marcus." The sound was barely audible, fragmented, yet it sliced through the tension like a razor. I slammed my hand on the dial, desperate to catch the source, but only the hiss of white noise replied. A cold sweat broke over me as the figure's presence grew undeniable, no longer confined to the back seat's shadow but manifesting as a spectral weight pressing down on my mind. I forced my eyes to the rearview mirror again. This time, the figure was clearer, a tall silhouette, coat trailing like spilled ink, face still obscured in shadow but unmistakably there. My pulse hammered in my throat. The world around me felt fragile, edges blurring like a dream slipping away. The road twisted ahead, impossible curves folding space in ways my mind refused to comprehend. A whisper echoed from the depths of my memory. Only by facing the darkness within can you hope to survive what lies beyond. I gripped the wheel tighter, determination flickering amidst the rising fear. The chase was far from over. The clock on the dashboard blinked 11:47 p.m., steady and mundane, a fragile tether to reality. But time betrayed me. What felt like an hour later, the clock barely ticked to 11:48 p.m., and then, without warning or memory of the minutes slipping by, it jumped abruptly to 12:15 a.m. The world itself seemed fractured, fragmented into disjointed pieces that refused to align. Ahead, a truck stop appeared like a mirage, its neon signs flickering in colors too vivid, too saturated against the rain-washed night. Desperate for human contact, for the sterile glow of fluorescent lights and the comforting hum of ordinary lives, I pulled in. The parking lot was deserted except for a lone 18-wheeler, its cab dark and silent as a tomb. The truck stop itself glowed like a beacon, but the light was unnatural, bending shadows at impossible angles, shadows that moved independently from the objects casting them. I sat in my car, engine idling, windshield wipers squeaking against glass that no longer bore rain. The storm had stopped without my notice. Rex, asleep in the back, breathed deeply, but his calmness only deepened my sense of isolation. Through the truck stop windows, movement flickered, a procession of figures or things that mimicked people, their jerky, marionette-like motions blurring my vision when I focused directly. A clerk behind the counter had too many arms, and the customers cast no reflections in the chilled glass doors of the refrigerated aisles. Miraculously, my phone came back to life, screen glowing with full battery and perfect signal. I called my wife, desperate for a lifeline to reality, for the warmth of her voice. She answered immediately, but her voice was distant, layered behind static I couldn't quite penetrate. She said she had been worried, that I should have been home hours ago. When I tried to explain, my words tumbled into nonsense, rearranged beyond comprehension even to me. She asked me to repeat myself, her concern mounting with every failed attempt. Then, abruptly, the phone died again, this time accompanied by a sound like breaking glass, but the noise came not from the device, but echoed deep inside my skull. I looked back at the truck stop and saw him. The figure in the overcoat stood framed in the doorway, his face hidden in shadow despite the fluorescent glare behind him. One impossibly long arm lifted, beckoning. Every instinct screamed to flee, floor the accelerator, disappear without a backward glance. But some deeper, ancestral knowledge stirred, a primal understanding of predator and prey. Running would only feed the hunt, distance meant nothing to something like him. I switched off the engine and stepped out. The scent around me was no longer rain and earth, it was copper and ozone, the sharp tang of lightning's aftermath. My footsteps echoed oddly in the vacant lot, reverberating as if the sound emerged from beneath the ground itself. Rex woke, whining low and continuous, his fur bristling, eyes wide with terror that needed no explanation. He pressed against the window as I approached the figure, which remained perfectly still, never acknowledging me except for that endless arm extended in invitation or command. With each step, the fluorescent lights flickered violently, strobing, turning my movement into a sequence of frozen images. When I was about 10 feet away, I finally saw the face. It was no face. A mirror reflecting my own features back, twisted and wrong. My eyes were too wide. My mouth stretched into a scream of terror I hadn't realized I wore. My skin looked pale and sickly, shadows beneath my eyes like bruises. It was unmistakably me. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. The figure spoke without moving lips. His voice was everywhere and nowhere, echoing inside my skull like my own thoughts spoken aloud. The voice, though without lips to shape it, filled the space inside my mind with chilling clarity. It was my voice, yet warped, distorted by fear and despair I had buried too deep to face. You cannot run from what you are, Marcus. The words reverberated through my skull, twisting my thoughts into knots. I staggered back, every instinct screaming that I should flee, yet my feet remained rooted to the gravel. The rain had ceased, but the air felt charged, thick with static and unseen menace. Rex growled low, a warning that trembled through his entire body. I looked down into those fierce, loyal eyes and felt a flicker of courage ignite within me. You're a part of me, the reflection whispered, the shadow I hide, the guilt I deny. I swallowed hard, swallowing the lump in my throat. The distorted image mirrored every failure, every regret, every secret I had tried to smother beneath layers of denial. But this was no longer a specter to run from. It was a reckoning. Slowly, I lifted my hand, trembling, toward the reflection, toward the broken man I saw mirrored back. Then I'll face it, I whispered. The figure's eyes flickered, not with malice, but something mournful, almost understanding. Face yourself, and maybe you will be free. The fluorescent lights flickered one last time before stabilizing, and the figure began to fade, melting into the night air like mist at dawn. I stood alone in the silent parking lot, the taste of copper still lingering in my mouth, but now tempered by a fragile hope. Rex nudged my hand, grounding me in the present. The road ahead was uncertain, dark and winding. But for the first time in a long time, I was ready to drive it. The truths he shared clawed at me, raw, unyielding truths that buckled my knees and sent my vision swirling like a storm at sea. He spoke of the thin places, those fragile seams where one reality bleeds into another, where the watchers stand, silent sentinels reflecting back not what we wish to see, but what lies beneath, our true selves, stripped of comforting illusions. I had been driving through one of those thin places for hours, maybe even days, trapped in a loop spun from my own fear and doubt. Every mile I thought I'd traveled only drew me deeper into that shadowed realm, suspended between certainty and nightmare. But there was hope. A way out. A price to pay. Acknowledgement. I had to accept what I had seen, what I was seeing, and what it revealed about the fragile fabric of reality, and my fragile place within it. I had to stop running from the truth that the world was far stranger and more dangerous than I had allowed myself to believe. Standing there in the impossible glow of the truck stop parking lot, beneath those strobing fluorescent lights, staring into the terrified mirror of my own face and his non-face, I made my choice. I nodded. And then, everything changed. The flickering ceased. The artificial light softened, warming into the familiar glow of mundane reality. The copper scent vanished, replaced by diesel and the faint, greasy aroma of hot dogs grilling inside. Through the windows, I saw a normal clerk leafing through a magazine, a trucker casually buying coffee, ordinary lives in an ordinary place. The figure in the overcoat was gone. But I knew he was never truly gone. He lingered at the edges of perception, a constant reminder that the reality I inhabited was but a single fragile layer atop an infinite, more complex whole. I walked back to my car on unsteady legs. Rex greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, unaware, or perhaps deeply aware, that we had just been trapped in a pocket of warped spacetime. The drive home took exactly the time it should have, through familiar landscapes beneath a normal sky. Yet I found myself checking my mirrors obsessively, watching for tall figures in dark coats, for footprints on my hood, for signs that the thin places might reopen. I never told anyone what happened that night. How could I? But sometimes, when the rain falls hard enough to muffle the world, I catch glimpses, just in the corner of my eye. There he stands, at the end of my driveway, reflected in my bedroom window, or in the back seat when I drive alone. He no longer threatens. He simply is. A sentinel reminding me I chose to see the world as it really is. And that once you choose that truth, you can never return to the comfortable blindness of ignorance. By morning, the footprints on my hood had vanished, but I know they were real. As real as the figure who left them. As real as the choice I made that night. As real as the watchers in overcoats, patiently waiting in those spaces between what we know and what is. Waiting for the next traveler to step out onto a dark highway, and into a larger, more terrible world than they ever imagined. And sometimes, on nights when the rain falls just right and the darkness presses close enough, I find myself grateful. Because knowing the truth, even when terrifying, is better than living a lie. Even when it means you're never truly alone. Story 4. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting sickly shadows across the rows of abandoned pool tables. Dust motes drifted through the stale air like tiny ghosts. Somewhere deep in the building, pipes groaned under the weight of years and neglect. I should have known better than to take the job cleaning out Mickey's game room after it had been shuttered for 3 years. The pay was too good. The timeline too generous. And when Mrs. Chen handed me the keys, her fingers trembled slightly as they brushed mine. She mentioned the previous cleaning crew had quit after 1 day. But I figured they'd probably found something better. The moment Mrs. Chen handed me the keys, a chill ran through my veins, a subtle warning I chose to ignore. The building itself was an aging relic, its facade cracked and peeling, as though time had been trying to erase it from memory. The kind of place where stories died quietly but lingered in the air like smoke. I pushed open the heavy door, and it groaned a protest that echoed through the cavernous space. Inside, the stale scent of neglect wrapped around me, a mix of mildew, old beer, and something faintly metallic, like blood dried long ago. The flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long, twitching shadows that seemed to pulse with the building's slow, mournful heartbeat. The pool tables were draped in dusty sheets, their once vibrant felt faded to a dull, lifeless gray. Broken cues lay scattered like forgotten bones across the floor. As I moved deeper into the room, my footsteps disturbed the dust, sending tiny clouds floating like restless spirits. I set to work, but the silence was oppressive. Every creak, every drip from a leaky pipe seemed magnified, as though the building itself was watching, waiting. On my second hour, as I wiped grime from a corner near the old jukebox, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow flickered just beyond the threshold of the back room, disappearing when I turned to look. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, fatigue playing games with my mind. But when I heard the faintest sound, like the click of a pool ball rolling across felt, I knew I wasn't alone. I wasn't supposed to be. The heavy air seemed to grow thicker as I paused, the silence settling into something far heavier than mere quiet. Mickey's game room had a history, one I was beginning to understand was darker and more tangled than the faded neon sign above the entrance. Mrs. Chen had hesitated when I first asked about it. Her eyes clouded with memories better left unspoken. But eventually, she told me the story, the kind of tale whispered in corners where old wounds refused to heal. Years ago, Mickey's was the heartbeat of this small town, a place where locals gathered to escape the grinding weight of everyday life. But beneath the laughter and clinking glasses lurked something sinister. The building had been built on land with a grim past, an old burial ground, desecrated and forgotten, its restless souls trapped beneath the concrete and cracked tiles. Strange happenings began soon after the doors first opened. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably. Shadows flickered at the edges of vision. Patrons whispered of cold touches and voices that seemed to come from nowhere. Over time, stories spread of a figure, a man in a dark coat, who appeared and disappeared without explanation, watching silently from the corners. Then came the disappearances. The first was a bartender who vanished during a busy Friday night shift. No trace, no explanation. After that, others followed, a waitress, a regular player, even a small group of teenagers who had dared to hold a midnight game. None ever returned. The previous cleaning crew had been hired to prepare the place for reopening after a long closure. But they lasted only one day. They left frantic, eyes wide with terror, refusing to say what had driven them away. Mrs. Chen never pressed, but the fear in her voice told me everything I needed to know. The game room was alive with something old and angry, something that didn't welcome outsiders. And now, it was watching me. The heavy steel door creaked open, releasing a stale breath of forgotten nights and broken dreams. Inside, 12 pool tables sprawled across the main floor like islands of green felt marooned on a sea of peeling linoleum. Dust lay thick on their surfaces, blanketing them in ghostly white. Cue sticks, abandoned and broken, littered the floor, silent relics of a livelier past. Neon beer signs clung to the walls, their colors dulled, no longer promising the warm escape they once did. I set to work, sweeping the dust, wiping grime from the tables, and sorting what might be salvageable from what was destined for the dumpster. The repetitive rhythm soothed me at first, the scrape of broom bristles, the thud of dustpans, the creak and groan of the building settling into its own decay. It was while cleaning the third table that something stopped me cold. On table 7, tucked in the far corner beneath a flickering fluorescent light, the pool balls were not scattered like the others. Instead, they formed a perfect, impossible pattern. The cue ball rested at one end, the 8 balls centered directly in the middle, with 6 other balls forming a flawless, unbroken line between them. No player could have arranged that shot. The 8 balls sat where it could only be reached by a cue ball passing through solid felt, a geometric impossibility. I shrugged it off as a prank left behind before the place closed. But the formation nagged at me. There was a deliberate precision to it, a ritualistic cadence that set my skin prickling. By late afternoon, sweat soaked my shirt despite the chill that clung to the air. The heating system had long been dead, and every breath came out in misty puffs. I had cleared 6 tables completely and was making good progress when I glanced back at table 7. The balls had moved. The arrangement was identical, cue ball, 8 ball, 6 others in perfect line, but now positioned at the opposite end of the table. The entire formation had rotated 180 degrees. My hands trembled. I pulled out my phone to snap a picture, but the camera refused to focus in the dim light. I told myself someone must have come in. Mrs. Chen maybe. But I hadn't heard a door open. No footsteps disturbed the quiet except the building's whispered creaks. I tried to focus on the work, but my eyes kept drifting back. The balls seemed to gleam faintly under the sickly fluorescent glow, as if glowing from within. The temperature dropped suddenly. My breath grew thicker, and cold seeped into my bones. I switched on the small space heater I'd brought, but it did nothing. The cold centered on table 7, an invisible fog curling around it. Then came the sound. A soft clicking, like 2 balls touching gently. I froze, mop in hand, straining to listen. Click, pause. Click, pause. Click. Slow, deliberate. I crept toward the table, sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. The balls lay still, but the cue ball trembled faintly, as if drawn by some unseen force. My throat was dry as dust. I reached out. The moment my fingertip brushed the cue ball, it rolled forward 3 inches. The 8 balls slid back the same distance. The 6 others followed, moving in perfect, synchronized harmony to keep their impossible line. I jerked my hand away, heart pounding wildly. The balls settled with a whisper on the felt. Suddenly, the silence was broken only by the rush of blood in my ears. I grabbed my phone and dialed Mrs. Chen. It went straight to voicemail. My voice cracked as I left a message, asking to delay the cleaning, explaining that there were complications I needed to sort out. The silence that followed my voicemail was heavy and oppressive, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. I sat there for a moment, the pool balls on table 7 still arranged in their impossible formation, the soft whispers of their movement echoing faintly in my mind. Reluctantly, I turned my attention back to the work at hand, but the chill in the room seemed to deepen, settling into my bones. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting distorted shadows that danced and warped on the walls. Every creak of the building's old bones sounded amplified, like footsteps closing in around me. As evening deepened into night, I noticed the shadows growing longer, thicker, as if the darkness itself was alive and breathing. The air grew colder still, and the stale scent of mildew was now tinged with something metallic, like blood, faint but unmistakable. My mind kept drifting back to that pattern on the table, the eerie precision of the balls moving as if controlled by some unseen hand. It was more than a prank, it was a message. But from whom? Or what? I decided to explore the back rooms, hoping to find some clue or old records that might explain the strange happenings. The narrow corridors were lined with peeling wallpaper and flickering bulbs, the air stale and heavy with neglect. At the end of one hallway, I found an old filing cabinet, its drawers jammed with dust-covered papers and yellowed photographs. As I sifted through them, a photograph slipped out, a black and white image of a group of men and women standing in front of the game room decades ago. In the background, a shadowy figure in a long coat stood apart from the group, face obscured. A chill ran down my spine. The name scribbled on the back of the photo was Mickey's Watcher. The name, Mickey's Watcher, scratched at the edges of my mind like a cold wind slipping through a cracked window. That faded photograph, a frozen moment from decades past, held a secret I was only beginning to glimpse. The shadowy figure lurking apart from the group, his face swallowed by darkness, felt less like a man and more like an omen. Digging deeper into the filing cabinet, I uncovered brittle newspaper clippings yellowed by time. Headlines spoke of mysterious accidents, disappearances, and a string of unexplained phenomena tied to the game room and the land beneath it. Patrons had reported sightings of a tall man in a dark overcoat appearing at odd hours, never speaking, never moving closer, just watching with eyes that seemed to pierce through to the soul. Locals whispered that this watcher was bound to the land itself, a guardian or a curse born from a tragedy long forgotten. Some said he was the restless spirit of a man who had died there under suspicious circumstances, others believed he was something older, an entity woven into the very fabric of the place, feeding on fear and regret. The most chilling tale was of a night when the watcher was seen silently guiding a lost soul out of the building, only for that soul to vanish forever shortly after, swallowed by the darkness beyond. It was said the watcher did not discriminate, he judged and claimed those who entered Mickey's, reflecting back their deepest fears until they were lost to the shadows. As I sat there, the weight of the story pressed down on me. The game room was no mere abandoned haunt, it was a nexus, a thin place where the veil between worlds grew thin, and the watcher waited patiently. I knew then that I was entangled in something far beyond dust and decay. The balls on table 7 had moved again, but this time, they formed a perfect cross, intersecting the previous impossible line, the ghost of the earlier pattern still faint in the dust. I froze, legs suddenly weak, breath shallow. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to flee this place and its uncanny puzzles, but something tethered me there. On impulse, I grabbed a pool cue from the cracked wall rack, the worn wood heavy and solid in my trembling hands. If whatever was playing games with me wanted to challenge me, I'd play back. I lined up the shot exactly as the formation seemed to demand, cue ball aimed at the 8 ball, threading through a line of obstacles that no physics could explain. I drew back and struck. The cue ball rolled forward smoothly, passing through the first ball as if it were nothing but mist, striking the 8 ball with a hollow thunk. The 8 ball moved toward the corner pocket, and then stopped, an inch from the edge. Slowly, it rolled backward, retracing its impossible path, settling exactly where it began. The other balls shifted simultaneously, realigning into the same eerie formation. A sudden chill swept the room. My breath clouded before me in thick, frosty plumes. The fluorescent light flickered rapidly, strobing the room into jagged shadows. Click. 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 The soft ticking grew louder, the same sound emanating from every pool table. Each displayed the same impossible setup, 12 identical arrangements, 12 synchronized shots impossible to perform. The clicking now filled the space like the rustle of 1,000 mechanical insects counting down to an unknowable end. My vision blurred at the edges. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet, the walls bent and swayed. My pulse thundered in my temples. Sweat soaked through my shirt despite the biting cold. And then I saw him. A figure at the far end of the room, barely visible in the fractured light. Tall, thin, clad in an old-fashioned vest and bow tie. His pale face was gaunt, his eyes glinted like polished stones, reflecting the flickering fluorescence. In his right hand, he gripped a pool cue with the confident poise of a master. He raised the cue, pointing it at me, then gestured toward table 7. His mouth moved, but no sound reached me over the mechanical clicking. Still, I understood. He wanted me to take the shot, the real shot, the final move to complete his unfinished masterpiece. As the doors of Mickey's closed long ago, this had been his obsession, an impossible shot perfected only in thought, forever lingering like a ghost tethered to the felt. My legs moved without will, carrying me toward table 7. The cue warmed in my hands, pulsing gently in rhythm with my racing heartbeat. The balls glowed faintly with their own eerie light. I set up the impossible shot once more, the one that might end this nightmare, or trap me here for eternity. And then, it dawned on me. This wasn't about physics or ghosts. It was obsession. A man consumed by his craft, bound to the room by the final, elusive shot that had haunted his soul since Mickey's doors shut. The figure nodded, eager yet patient. He had waited for someone to finish his game, to bring closure to a lifetime of calculation and yearning. I could take the shot. I could give peace to a restless spirit. Or I could walk away. Leave him waiting for the next lost soul. The cue trembled in my hands. I set it down. Some games aren't meant to be finished. Some obsessions are better left incomplete. The moment I set the cue down, the room seemed to exhale, a slow, heavy breath that rattled the stained ceiling tiles and sent a shiver through the stale air. The clicking stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so deep it pressed against my ears like thick velvet. The faint glow from the balls faded, the eerie light retreating like a tide pulling back into darkness. The figure at the far end of the room watched me intently, his polished stone eyes reflecting a flicker of disappointment, but also a strange understanding, an acceptance of the choice I had made. Without a word, he slowly turned and faded into the shadows, melting away like smoke dissolving in cold air. I stood there, heart hammering, breath shallow and ragged, caught between relief and an unsettling void that threatened to swallow me whole. The oppressive cold lingered a moment longer before the heating system, silent for years, flickered back to life, its faint hum weaving a thread of normalcy through the haunted space. I gathered my things in a daze, my hands trembling, and made my way out of the game room. The exit door creaked open, spilling me back into the damp night air where the rain had finally stopped. The world outside felt simultaneously alien and achingly familiar, like waking from a half-remembered nightmare that refuses to release its grip. Days passed, but the weight of the game room followed me like a shadow. The impossibility of what I'd witnessed pressed against the edges of my mind, refusing to be dismissed as hallucination or fatigue. At night, I dreamed of impossible shots and whispering balls. I heard the faint, rhythmic clicking, counting down from some unseen clock. And sometimes, when the world was quiet and the darkness thick, I'd catch a glimpse in the corner of my eye, a tall, thin figure, bow tie gleaming faintly, watching patiently from the shadows. The game, it seemed, was never truly over. The figure's expression twisted, part rage, part desperate pleading, but I was already moving toward the door. Behind me, the clicking sound swelled into a cacophony that could have been applause, or condemnation. I couldn't tell which. That night, I left Mickey's game room behind and never returned. I sent Mrs. Chen my resignation by email, alongside a firm recommendation: hire a demolition crew instead of cleaners. Some buildings are better left to rubble than restoration. Yet sometimes, passing by the old arcade on my way to other jobs, I swear I hear that faint clicking echoing through the boarded windows. And I know, deep down, somewhere in the shadows, 12 pool tables still display that impossible shot, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to finally sink the 8-ball and end the game. I just hope that someone is never me. Story 5. The GPS died at the worst possible moment, its blue glow flickering out as rain hammered the windshield like skeletal fingers scratching for entry. The interstate stretched ahead like an endless ribbon, swallowed whole by a throat of darkness that devoured my headlights. My gas gauge hovered perilously near empty, and the nearest station on my last signal was still 40 miles away. That's when I spotted the exit ramp, unmarked and barely visible, peeling away from the main road like a whispered secret. I should have trusted the knot in my gut. I should have known better. But the worn, cracked pavement called me onward. This road was older than the interstate, its surface pocked and scarred, rattling my teeth and aching my spine. Ancient trees leaned close on either side, their branches entwined overhead, forming a tunnel of shadows barely pierced by my headlights. The rain had ceased, but the silence that replaced it was worse, too complete, too deliberate, as if the world itself held its breath. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, my breath shallow in the thick, stale air of the car, despite the ventilation running full blast. Every instinct screamed for me to turn back, but the fuel gauge whispered no. I'd committed. I had to see it through. Then I saw the first one. 20 feet from the road's edge, perfectly still in my headlight's wash, stood a mannequin, the kind you'd find in a department store window. But wrong. Its pale, featureless face faced me directly. One arm raised, finger pointing down the road ahead. The pose was natural enough, but something about its placement was deliberate, a message tailored just for me. I eased off the accelerator. Speed dropped from 50 to 40, then 30. I told myself it was roadside decoration. An art installation or prank. But my heart thumped like a trapped animal. The mannequin vanished in the rearview mirror as I rounded the curve. The road twisted left, then right, following the hillside's contour. My headlights swept across more trees, shadows, empty pavement. At the next curve, there was another. Closer this time, 15 feet away. Same pale skin, smooth, featureless face. This one's arm pointed at a 45-degree angle toward a side road branching right. Its head tilted, as if studying me. More animated. More aware. Cold sweat beaded my forehead despite the heater blasting. I pressed the gas harder, eager to escape whatever twisted game this was. The engine growled low as the speedometer climbed back to 50. But the curves kept bringing more, a third, a fourth, a fifth mannequin. Each posed differently. Each arm pointing somewhere new. Some toward dirt tracks barely visible between the trees. Others indicating turns ahead on the main road. The headlights caught the first of the narrow side roads, barely more than dirt tracks swallowed by overgrown brush and towering pines. Each path seemed to beckon with a silent promise, or perhaps a warning, whispered by the cold fingers of the night. I hesitated at the curve, watching the mannequin's pointed arm, then glanced at the gas gauge, still teetering near empty, and knew I had little choice. The main highway behind me had become a prison of shadows and silent watchers. Maybe one of these forsaken trails held a way out, or at least answers. I turned onto the closest side road, the car jolting over loose stones and tangled roots. The forest closed in quickly, branches scraping against the windows, leaves whispering secrets in the wind. My headlights barely pierced the darkness, revealing glimpses of rusted signs and broken fences, remnants of a forgotten place swallowed by time. The silence here was deeper than the highway's stillness, thick with expectation and unease. Every creak of the car, every snap of twig under tires, seemed to echo louder in this enclosed world. Suddenly, the path opened into a small clearing bathed in cold moonlight. At its center stood a weathered stone monument, cracked and covered in moss, etched with symbols half erased by centuries. The air thrummed with an ancient energy, and I felt the gaze of unseen eyes pressing upon me, watchers beyond the watchers, guardians of secrets buried deep beneath the soil. As I stepped out of the car, a faint sound stirred in the darkness, a distant echo of laughter, fragmented and haunting, like voices caught between worlds. I knew then the side roads weren't just escapes. They were gateways. Gateways to histories long buried, to places where the veil between reality and nightmare was thinnest. And where, perhaps, my own journey would reach its reckoning. The mannequins formed a silent chain of sentinels, guiding me deeper into the tangled maze of backwoods highways. My breath grew shallow, each inhale a ragged gasp. The steering wheel slick beneath my sweating palms felt both foreign and all too familiar. I fought to focus on the road, but my eyes darted involuntarily to the shoulder, searching desperately for the next figure. They appeared with clockwork regularity, one after every curve, never quite in the same spot, never quite in the same pose. Yet the worst part was their flawless appearance. No weathering, no dirt, no sign they'd ever endured wind or rain. Their simple white shirts and dark pants seemed freshly laundered and pressed, as if arranged mere moments before my arrival, placed by invisible hands that knew my every turn. I fumbled for my phone, fingers trembling, desperate to call for help, any help. But the screen was lifeless, empty bars mocking my isolation. No signal. No connection. Alone, I was trapped with these silent watchers multiplying with every mile. The road climbed steeply now, twisting up the mountainside. My ears popped with the altitude shift. The trees grew dense, branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers ready to snatch at my car. A creeping fog seeped through the trunks, swallowing the already dim light. Then something froze my blood cold. The next mannequin wasn't just pointing, it was looking at me. Its head, impossibly, turned to track my progress. Smooth, featureless face following the car as I rounded the curve. The motion was subtle but unmistakable, a slow rotation keeping its eyeless gaze locked on my windshield. My foot slammed the brakes without thought. Tires screamed against wet asphalt as the car jerked to a halt. Heart pounding violently, I could taste copper on my tongue. The mannequin stood utterly still, arm extended, pointing toward a narrow gap in the trees, a side road swallowed by darkness. Minutes stretched like hours. Engine idling, hands trembling on the wheel, trapped by that silent command. Follow its direction, or continue straight into the unknown. The gas gauge sank deeper into the red zone. Soon, fuel would be gone, and I'd be stranded among these things. Panic churned fresh in my gut. I had to move. I eased off the brake, pressed the accelerator, and rolled past the mannequin. In my peripheral vision, the figure's head turned, tracking me still, a tether unbroken. Curve after curve, mannequin after mannequin. Each placed with surgical precision, each gesture part of a silent GPS made of plastic and cloth. Someone, or something, wanted me to follow a very specific path through this labyrinth. Why? And who? The questions burned as I navigated further, fog thickening, visibility dropping to 50 feet. The world beyond my headlights faded to gray oblivion. Then I saw them. At a Y-shaped intersection, 3 mannequins stood in a triangle, blocking every path. Unlike the others, they wore torn jeans, faded t-shirts, scuffed sneakers, clothes worn and weathered, as if they'd lived lives of their own. The silent watchers had changed. The game was evolving. The triangle of mannequins loomed ahead like a grim crossroads, each one poised to guide me down a different path. Their worn jeans, faded t-shirts, and scuffed sneakers gave them an eerie lifelikeness, as if these silent sentinels carried echoes of forgotten lives, ghosts trapped in plastic and fabric. I slowed to a crawl, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. The fog curled thicker around the intersection, swallowing the edges of the roads like a living thing. Each path beckoned, shadowed and uncertain. The first mannequin pointed left, its arm extended with quiet insistence. The trail there disappeared quickly into dense thickets, the underbrush thick and tangled. The second gestured straight ahead, where the asphalt cracked and gave way to a gravel road littered with fallen leaves. The third indicated the right fork, a narrow dirt path winding upward along the hillside, its destination hidden in darkness. My heart pounded, torn between dread and desperate hope. Which way led to salvation, and which to deeper entrapment? A whisper drifted on the cold air, a voice not spoken aloud but felt within my bones. Choose wisely. I glanced at Rex, whose eyes gleamed with quiet understanding. His presence was a tether to the present, a reminder I was not entirely alone. Taking a deep breath, I eased the car forward toward the left path, the one disappearing into the wild undergrowth. The tires crunched over loose gravel and fallen branches as the road narrowed and twisted, the trees pressing closer with every turn. The world outside the headlights seemed to ripple, shadows flickering at the edges of vision. The clicking sound, once distant and mechanical, now beat like a heartbeat, quickening with each mile. Behind me, the mannequins remained at the crossroads, silent watchers awaiting my return, or my disappearance. I knew the choice was far from simple. The road ahead was a journey not only through the dark woods but into the depths of my own fears, and the shadows that had followed me all my life. Beneath the creeping canopy of ancient pines, the mystery of the mannequins unfurled like a dark tapestry woven from threads of forgotten sorrow and silent judgment. Their flawless forms, immobile yet unnervingly aware, were not mere roadside oddities or pranks, but vessels of an eerie purpose that reached far beyond human understanding. Legend whispered through the nearby town spoke of the silent watchers, spectral guardians summoned centuries ago to patrol the thin places where worlds bled into one another. Crafted long ago by a secretive order, these figures were said to embody the lingering spirits of lost souls, those trapped between life and death, between past mistakes and unresolved guilt. Each mannequin was more than plastic and cloth, it was a living echo, a fragment of a soul condemned to eternal vigilance. Their silent arms, forever pointing, were meant to guide, or mislead, the unwary traveler through the shifting labyrinth of reality and illusion. The original watchers were forged in a desperate bid to contain a growing darkness, a breach in the veil that threatened to unravel the very fabric of the world. As punishment and protection, souls who had strayed too far into shadow were bound to these figures, tasked with steering others away from or toward fates tied to their own unfinished stories. Over time, the watchers multiplied, their influence seeping into highways, back roads, and forgotten paths. They became both guardians and jailers, their intentions inscrutable, their judgments silent. The mannequins I followed were not random. They were part of an ancient design, a cryptic GPS of spirits seeking resolution, retribution, or perhaps release. And as the fog thickened and the shadows deepened, I realized I was no longer simply navigating a road. I was traversing the fragile boundaries between worlds, guided by watchers who had long since forgotten if their charge was to protect or to condemn. The mannequins' poses shifted, no longer rigid and unnatural, but casual, almost human. Their faces bore details, painted eyes that seemed to glisten, molded noses, parted lips poised on the edge of speech. The craftsmanship was uncanny, so precise it blurred the line between plastic and flesh. I brought the car to a halt again, engine idling as my trembling hands gripped the wheel. Through the windshield, I studied the three figures. The left one pointed toward a winding road diving deeper into the forest. The middle gestured straight ahead, where the pavement continued but looked worn and neglected. The right figure indicated a steep path climbing into the hills. Frozen by indecision and mounting dread, I watched as all three mannequins slowly turned their heads toward my car in perfect unison. 6 painted eyes fixed on me, 6 lips curled into the same faint, eerie smile. Heads tilted identically, welcoming yet horrifying. Then they moved. Slowly, deliberately. Arms shifted, fingers adjusted their points. The left figure gestured more urgently down its path. The middle swept a broad arc, encompassing the straight road. The right raised both arms, forming a clear arrow toward the hillside climb. My vision blurred. Sweat soaked my skin despite the cool mountain air. The car felt like a furnace. Blinking hard to clear the haze, I hoped it was a hallucination. But the mannequins had moved again, closer now, maybe 10 feet from my bumper. Their painted eyes caught my headlights, glowing with an unnatural intensity that seemed to pierce through the windshield and into my soul. The gas gauge needle hovered at the red line, empty or close enough. I had to choose. Left, straight, or right. Each road disappeared into darkness. Each mannequin promised safe passage. But safe passage to what? Salvation or something worse? The right figure suddenly raised its other arm, an unmistakable gesture toward the climbing path. Its smile seemed wider, impossible, but I saw it. Without conscious thought, my foot pressed the accelerator. The car lurched right, climbing the twisting mountain road. Passing between the watchers, I caught their shifting gazes, their smiles growing more satisfied with each turn. The road wound steeply, switchbacks folding over the mountainside. The fog thickened until I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Branches scratched the roof and sides, a relentless, teeth-grinding symphony. More mannequins appeared, older now, worn clothing, desperate poses. Some reached out, pleading for help. Others pointed behind me, warning to turn back. A few stood with bowed heads, mourning or defeated. The fuel light blinked relentlessly. The engine's protest grew louder. It would die soon, leaving me stranded among these silent sentinels. Panic surged. I needed shelter, a house, a gas station, any sign of life. Then I crested the hill. Lights. A cluster of buildings on a plateau, warm yellow windows piercing the fog like distant beacons of salvation. The lights shimmered through the thick fog like distant promises, warmth, safety, a reprieve from the endless night that had chased me through twisted roads and silent sentinels. My grip on the wheel tightened as I eased the car forward, the engine's growl faltering but still holding. The road leveled out onto the plateau, the buildings materializing from the mist with startling clarity. They looked old, weathered by time and storm, but alive, windows glowing softly, curtains twitching as if someone watched from within. As I pulled into the main street, the silence pressed down again, heavy and expectant. No sounds of life met me, not laughter, no voices, no engines humming. Just the low whistle of the wind through cracked shutters and the faint rustle of dead leaves. I parked near a small cluster of shops, a diner, a general store, and what looked like a gas station, though its pumps were silent and rusted. The flickering neon sign above the diner cast uneven light, the letters, "Welcome," partially burnt out but still readable. Rex stirred beside me, his ears perked, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the fog. I stepped out into the chill night, boots crunching on gravel. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and something else, something sharp and electric, like ozone after a storm. I approached the diner's door, hand trembling as I reached for the handle. It creaked open before I touched it. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and fried grease. The room was dimly lit by a lone flickering bulb overhead, casting long shadows across empty booths and a dusty counter. Behind the counter stood a man, tall, gaunt, with eyes as dark and unreadable as the fog outside. He watched me without surprise, as if he had been expecting me all along. "Lost," he said simply. I nodded, unable to find words. He gestured to a booth near the window. "Sit. Warm up." As I settled, the door clicked shut behind me, and somewhere in the distance, the fog seemed to pulse, alive with watchful eyes. I knew then that whatever this place was, it was no ordinary refuge. And that the watchers were never far behind. The sign at the edge of the settlement read, "Welcome to Millbrook, population 247. Beneath it, smaller letters proclaimed, "Home of the Millbrook Mannequin Museum, open daily." Relief surged through me, so powerful it nearly brought tears to my eyes. Civilization. People. Help. I thought I could refuel here, get directions back to the interstate, and finally put this nightmare behind me. The mannequins lining the road suddenly seemed less threatening, probably just an elaborate advertising campaign for the museum, designed to lure tourists down this forgotten backroad. I coasted into the town's main street, passing darkened storefronts and deserted sidewalks. Most buildings looked old but well cared for, their facades bearing the rustic charm that drew weekend visitors from the city. A few porch lights cast faint glows over steps and doorways, yet no one stirred in the shadows. The only business open appeared to be a combined gas station and general store at the far end of the street. Fluorescent lights buzzed behind grimy windows, and a single pump stood sentinel beside the building. I pulled up to the pump, and my engine gave one last wheeze before dying completely. Perfect timing. I climbed out on legs that felt like rubber, grateful to be on solid ground. The air was cool and still, carrying the scents of pine and wood smoke. Somewhere distant, a dog barked once and fell silent. Otherwise, the night held an unnatural quiet. The pump was old but functional. I slid my card through the reader and began filling the tank, watching the numbers rise steadily on the digital display. With each gallon, confidence seeped back into my bones. Soon, I'd be back on the interstate, this strange detour nothing more than an odd story to tell over drinks. But as I waited, my newly regained calm evaporated like morning mist. Across the street, in front of a small museum, a row of mannequins stood behind a chain-link fence. Even in the dim light, I could see their poses, some pointing down the street, others gesturing toward the museum entrance, a few standing with arms at their sides. They looked exactly like the figures I'd encountered on the road, the same clothing, the same positioning. My gaze drifted further along the street, catching more details in the shadows. More mannequins filled shop windows, their painted faces turned toward the street. Others perched on bus benches and leaned in doorways, frozen as if waiting for transportation or friends that would never come. The entire town seemed inhabited by these silent plastic residents, locked in eternal poses. The gas pump clicked off, jolting me back to immediate concerns. The tank was full, my card charged, and the car ready to carry me away. But as I climbed behind the wheel, a cold awareness settled over me. I was being watched by dozens of painted eyes. I started the engine and pulled away, eager to find the exit. But as I drove through Millbrook, searching for signs or route markers, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every street I turned down curved me back toward the town center. Every road dead-ended at the same cluster of buildings. At every intersection, more mannequins stood, pointing directions that led nowhere but deeper into the maze of identical streets. I'd been driving for 20 minutes, weaving through a dozen routes, yet I was no closer to escape. My fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, but I was trapped. And then I noticed, the mannequins I'd seen earlier, in windows and doorways, had moved. Not drastically, but unmistakably. One figure that had pointed east now gestured south. Another that sat on a bench had risen and extended an arm toward a narrow side street I'd missed. They were guiding me again, just as on the mountain road, leading me through a choreographed pattern, keeping me confined within their domain. Beneath the veneer of quaint charm and sleepy streets, Millbrook harbored a secret as old as the trees that clawed at its edges. The mannequins were more than mere tourist traps, they were the echoes of a forgotten curse woven into the town's very foundation. Legend spoke of Millbrook as a place where time and reality frayed, a thin place between worlds where restless spirits could bleed through. Decades ago, before the town blossomed into a quiet haven, it had been home to a man named Elias Grayson, a brilliant but tormented artisan who crafted lifelike mannequins so exquisite they seemed alive. Elias was obsessed with perfection, driven by grief after losing his family in a mysterious fire that consumed his home. He believed that by creating his mannequins, he could capture and preserve the souls of those lost, immortalizing them in his haunting creations. But in meddling with forces beyond understanding, he tore a fragile veil between the living and the dead. As the mannequins multiplied, so too did the whispers of unease. Townsfolk began to vanish, and those who stayed found themselves haunted by silent figures lurking in the shadows, always watching, always waiting. Some say Elias's spirit merged with his creations, becoming the eternal watcher, forever bound to the town and his unfinished masterpiece. The mannequins became conduits, trapped souls compelled to guide, or trap, the living, pulling travelers like me into a web of mirrors and illusions. Millbrook was no ordinary town. It was a labyrinth of sorrow and obsession, where the line between human and mannequin blurred, and where those who entered risked losing more than just their way. The car's headlights swept over the familiar intersection, the very same trio of mannequins I'd first seen at the Y junction on the mountain road. They stood in identical positions, arms frozen in their pointing gestures, smiles painted perfectly across their faces. But now, I understood those smiles for what they truly were, not welcomes, but smug satisfaction. Satisfaction that their carefully woven plan had ensnared yet another traveler, guiding me to exactly where they wanted. Panic surged anew. I slammed on the brakes and yanked the transmission into reverse. The tires screamed against the asphalt as I backed around the corner, desperate to escape the trap. If I couldn't find an exit by moving forward, maybe I could retrace my path, follow the chain of pointing figures back up the mountain until I reached the interstate. But then my headlights fell upon something that stopped my heart cold. The road I'd driven down, the only road that had brought me into Millbrook, was gone. In its place stood a wall of trees, trunks packed so densely that not even a breath of wind could pass through. The pavement simply ended at the tree line, as if it had been surgically excised from the earth itself. I was trapped, completely, utterly trapped. Suddenly, the mannequins began to move again. Slowly, deliberately, dozens of them converged, forming a loose circle around my car. Their painted eyes caught my headlights, sparkling like a constellation of cold stars in the night. Their smiles had widened, no longer subtle, but broad and satisfied, as if celebrating the triumph of their hunt. Yet they did not advance or threaten. They simply watched, patient as only lifeless things can be, content to let time claim what violence could not. I realized then that their nature was alien, not malicious in any human sense, but utterly foreign. They collected travelers like me, herding us through an elaborate maze of deception and false choices. But they did not kill or harm. They kept us. The truth should have crushed me with terror. Instead, a strange calm settled within, a quiet acceptance. Fighting was futile. Rage meaningless. The mannequins had won by patience and design. And now, they would add me to their collection. I turned off the engine and stepped out for the final time. The mannequins stood silent, watching as I moved to the center of their circle. Up close, the incredible detail of their craftsmanship revealed itself, every crease of fabric, every delicate line of expression, every tiny flaw that made them almost, human. But not quite. Their painted gazes settled on me, cold and unblinking. Then, as I stood among them, I understood what they truly collected, not flesh and bone, but something deeper, something that could only be given willingly. The choice was mine. Resist, fight, and eventually succumb to despair. Or surrender and join them willingly. Become part of their silent community. Add my own guidance to the chain, leading other lost travelers to this very moment of decision. The mannequins waited, patient as stone, while I made my choice. When dawn broke over Millbrook, the town looked unchanged. The mannequins stood in their appointed places, arms pointing down streets that led nowhere and everywhere. Their painted smiles welcoming visitors who would never leave. But now, there was one more figure among them. A newcomer at the gas station, arm extended toward the mountain road. His pose was natural. His expression peaceful. His painted eyes reflected the morning light with the patient satisfaction of one who had finally found his purpose. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the mist-shrouded hills surrounding Millbrook, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the deserted streets. As the town stirred beneath the pale sky, a solitary figure appeared on the horizon, a traveler winding down the cracked backroads that led to the enigmatic settlement. Her name was Emily. Unlike those before her, she carried no illusions of safety or comfort. The weight of a past burdened with loss and unanswered questions pressed against her heart like a stone. She sought Millbrook not for rest, but for answers, drawn inexplicably by whispers on the wind and fragmented memories that refused to fade. As Emily's car rolled into the town's outskirts, the mannequins watched silently from their frozen perches, eyes gleaming faintly in the morning light. Their painted faces held no welcome, only an ancient, unyielding patience. Arms pointed down winding streets that twisted like riddles, as if inviting her to enter a game far older and more perilous than she could imagine. The town felt alive with secrets, layers of time folded over one another, where the veil between what was and what might be was as thin as the morning mist. Emily's breath caught as she realized that Millbrook was not merely a place, but a crossroads, where lost souls became part of the endless, silent chorus that haunted its streets. And as she stepped into the waiting maze, the watcher's gaze settled firmly upon her, patient and relentless. Her journey into the heart of Millbrook had only just begun. Emily's tires crunched softly on the gravel as she eased her car past the weathered sign welcoming her to Millbrook. The faint scent of pine mingled with something else, something older, like the whisper of forgotten histories curling in the damp morning air. Her hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, a nervous energy threading through her veins. She passed storefronts bathed in the soft light of dawn. Their windows reflected the stillness of a town caught between waking and dreaming. Mannequins stood vigil in doorways and empty benches, their painted eyes holding a steady, silent watch that unsettled her more with each glance. Emily's gaze drifted to the gas station at the edge of town, the same place where travelers before her had found a fragile moment of refuge, only to become part of something far less forgiving. A figure emerged from the shadows beside the pumps, tall, thin, with a face half hidden beneath the brim of a worn hat. He watched her approach with an unreadable expression, the faintest trace of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Looking for something?" he asked, voice low and gravelly. Emily hesitated. "Answers," she replied quietly. The man nodded slowly, as if confirming a secret only they shared. "Millbrook holds many answers. Some come willingly. Others are brought." Behind him, the mannequins shifted imperceptibly, their arms subtly repositioning to point toward the town's winding streets, paths both beckoning and warning. Emily swallowed hard. Whatever had drawn her here was no accident. As she stepped forward, the boundaries between the world she knew and the shadows gathering in Millbrook began to blur. Her journey into the heart of the silent town, and its patient watchers, had begun. The man's eyes gleamed with an unsettling calmness, like a still lake concealing unfathomable depths beneath its surface. His worn hat cast a shadow over his face, but the faint lines etched into his skin told stories of years spent witnessing things that no ordinary person should see. As Emily hesitated, he took a slow, deliberate step closer. "I'm called Jonah," he said quietly, voice like gravel sliding over ancient stones. "I've been here longer than I care to admit, longer than most visitors realize." He gestured toward the mannequins standing silent and watchful along the streets. "They're not just displays. They're guardians. Keepers of balance. Millbrook isn't a town like others. It sits on a crossroads, a thin place where worlds overlap." Jonah's gaze sharpened, fixing Emily with a piercing intensity. "Those who come here are seekers or wanderers, drawn by the whispers of the past or the shadows of their own regrets. The mannequins, they guide. They judge. They preserve." Emily swallowed hard, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. "Are you one of them?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jonah's smile was faint but knowing. "Not quite. I'm something in between, a watcher and a warden. I help the lost find their path, though sometimes the path leads to acceptance, or to joining the collection." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, weathered token, a faded insignia etched with symbols that seemed to shift under the dim light. "This is my mark, a reminder of the duty I bear." Emily's eyes flicked to the token, then back to Jonah. "Why me? Why bring me here?" Jonah's expression softened, though the weight behind his words was heavy. "Because you carry shadows that resonate with this place. Because Millbrook has a way of calling those who need its reckoning, and you, Emily, are at the heart of its story now. A distant echo of the clicking sound filled the air, as if the town itself awaited her decision. Jonah's voice lowered to a murmur. Choose wisely. The watchers will be patient, but they do not forget. The memory of that moment clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. And when the next lost traveler stumbled upon the unmarked exit ramp, when their fuel ran low and their GPS faltered in the fog, he would be there, silent, patient, to point the way. Just as the mannequins had once guided him. The collection complete, the circle closed. The pattern ready to begin anew. Story 6. The old brick walls of Millbrook Academy whispered secrets centuries old, and tonight they exhaled a particularly cold breath against my neck. I'd been the night security guard for 3 months, long enough to know this place held more than forgotten textbooks and dust-covered homework. The building groaned with age, wooden floors creaked beneath my steps, settling into patterns laid down since 1923. But tonight felt different. The silence carried weight. My flashlight sliced through the darkness of the main hallway, catching dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in its beam. The usual sounds hummed around me, fluorescent lights that never quite died, wind whispering through cracked windows, the occasional snap of old timber settling. But beneath it all, something else lurked, a presence that made the hairs on my forearm rise in silent alarm. I'd always been sensitive to atmosphere. My ex-wife used to mock me, told friends at parties how I refused to enter certain rooms, claiming they felt wrong. Maybe she was right. But 3 months patrolling Millbrook Academy had taught me otherwise. The headmaster had mentioned the service tunnels during orientation, old heating system conduits connecting the main building to the gym and cafeteria. He'd been casual, dismissive even. But I caught the hesitation in his eyes. A silent warning to stay away. Of course, that only made me more curious. Tonight, with the autumn wind rattling windows and nerves fraying, I decided to explore those tunnels. The access door hid behind the boiler room in the basement, locked with a newer padlock. The key hung on my ring, labeled simply ST in faded ink. The basement air was thick and stale, carrying metallic hints of rust and concrete dust. My footsteps echoed strangely in the narrow, low-ceilinged corridor, muffled yet oddly amplified. When I reached the tunnel door, my hand trembled on the key. A primal voice whispered to turn back, retreat to the safer shadows of classrooms and halls. But curiosity won. The door creaked open reluctantly, revealing a narrow passage swallowed by darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. A cool breeze blew out, bringing with it a scent I couldn't place, not decay, but something ancient and organic, like earth breathing beneath a tomb. The walls, rough concrete stained with mineral streaks that shimmered like frozen tears in my light, closed in tightly. I stepped inside, my breath quickened. The space barely wide enough for my shoulders, the ceiling low enough to force a slight stoop. Each step produced a hollow thud that echoed down the tunnel far longer than expected. About 20 feet in, I stopped to get my bearings. According to schematics, the tunnel should run straight for 100 yards before branching toward the gym and cafeteria. But standing there in the suffocating dark, I felt anything but sure. Then I heard it. A sharp clap. Behind me. From the way I'd come. I spun, flashlight sweeping frantic arcs over empty concrete walls. The tunnel stretched vacant, silent as a crypt. My heart jolted. I waited, breath caught in my throat. Only my ragged breathing and the distant hum of machinery above answered. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the old building settling, a loose pipe clattering in the boiler room. But my palms slicked with sweat, the flashlight nearly slipping in my grip. The tunnel seemed to breathe around me, its cold breath brushing my neck. And I knew the night had only just begun. The darkness in the service tunnels thickened, pressing in from all sides as my flashlight flickered in trembling hands. The echo of the sharp clap lingered in the stale air, now joined by softer sounds, whispers, scratches, the faint rustle of something unseen shifting just beyond the beam. Each step forward felt heavier, the narrow passage seeming to lengthen and contract, as if breathing alongside me. Shadows writhed against the rough concrete walls, shapes twisting in impossible ways, defying logic and reason. A sudden metallic clang rang out somewhere deeper in the tunnel, a sound too deliberate to be random. My heart slammed against my ribs, breath hitching as the beam caught a glimpse of movement, a fleeting silhouette darting just beyond the light's reach. I froze, senses heightened to a razor's edge. The air grew colder still, carrying a faint scent, wet earth mixed with something acrid, like burnt paper or old smoke. As I advanced, the whispers grew clearer, shifting from indecipherable murmurs to faint echoes of voices long silenced, snatches of laughter, sorrowful sobs, and urgent warnings. Then, in the dim pool of my flashlight, I saw them, etched into the concrete walls, faint, ancient markings, symbols that pulsed softly with a pale, unnatural glow. They resembled the designs I'd glimpsed in dusty books back at the Academy's library, sigils used in forgotten rites, meant to bind or protect. A shiver ran down my spine. These tunnels weren't just conduits for heat, they were something far older, paths carved in shadow, corridors where the past lingered like a wound. Ahead, the tunnel forked. To the left, a narrow stairwell spiraled downward into deeper darkness. To the right, the passage continued, but the walls here seemed to breathe, pulsing with a faint rhythm that matched my racing heart. A final whisper echoed, "Choose." My flashlight flickered violently, then steadied, as if waiting for my decision. Every instinct screamed to flee, but some force, curious, relentless, drew me onward. Into the shadows, where secrets waited patiently to be uncovered. With my breath shallow and heart hammering, I stood at the fork in the tunnel, the ancient symbols faintly glowing behind me. To the left, the narrow stairwell spiraled down into a darkness so thick it seemed to swallow the faintest flicker of my flashlight. To the right, the passage stretched forward, the walls pulsing rhythmically, as if alive, breathing alongside me. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to flee the weight of history pressing in from every cracked surface. But something deeper, curiosity mingled with a haunting sense of purpose, compelled me to move forward. I took a cautious step toward the right passage. The air grew colder, heavier, the pulsing walls seeming to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. Shadows twisted and curled just beyond my vision, taunting the edges of my sanity. As I advanced, the tunnel widened into a vast chamber. The ceiling arched high above, dripping with ancient, glistening stalactites. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, blood, maybe, or rust. In the center of the chamber stood an altar carved from black stone, etched with the same glowing symbols. Around it lay relics, rusted tools, fragments of broken glass, and a faded photograph yellowed with age. The image showed a group of children in old-fashioned school uniforms, their eyes scratched out, faces forever lost to time. A low hum filled the chamber, vibrations that resonated in my bones, a chorus of voices rising and falling like wine through the trees. The whispers returned, now urgent, pleading, warning. I felt eyes upon me, countless unseen watchers, their presence both oppressive and sorrowful. The choice I'd made to follow this path had led me here, to the heart of the Academy's darkest secret. Somewhere in the shadows lurked the truth of what haunted these halls, the source of the cold breath against my neck, the restless spirits tethered by forgotten sins. I knew the journey was far from over. The darkness of the service tunnel seemed to press in tighter with each step I took, the narrow concrete walls absorbing my every footfall into an eerie silence. The stale air was thick, heavy with the metallic tang of rusted pipes and the faint, unplaceable scent that clung like a shadow, something organic and ancient. My flashlight beam wavered slightly in my sweaty grasp, catching mineral streaks on the walls that glistened like frozen tears, cold and unyielding. The ceiling sloped low, forcing me to duck, each step echoing unnaturally loud, stretching farther down the tunnel than it should have, as if the passage itself was alive, listening. About 20 feet in, I paused to steady myself. The schematics in my mind told me the tunnel was straightforward, 100 yards straight before branching off to the gym and cafeteria. Simple. But the weight in my chest told a different story. Here, in the pitch black, surrounded by cold stone and silence, simple was an illusion. Then, a sharp, sudden clap from behind me. My heart jolted violently as I whipped around, flashlight beam slicing the darkness, desperate for any sign of movement. The tunnel was empty, walls staring back like cold sentinels. Breath caught in my throat, I listened. Only my own ragged breathing and the distant, mechanical hum somewhere far above, the building settling, pipes groaning. I pressed onward, forcing the dread down like a rising tide. But sweat slicked my palms, making the flashlight slippery in my grip, and the oppressive darkness felt like it was tightening its grip around me. The tunnels weren't just old service passages, they held secrets, waiting patiently, watching. And I was not alone. As I pressed deeper into the tunnel's oppressive darkness, the beam of my flashlight danced nervously along the rough concrete walls, revealing patches of mineral deposits that shimmered faintly like frozen tears. Each step echoed strangely, longer and more hollow than it should have been, as if the tunnel itself was amplifying my presence. Then, just as my nerves tightened to breaking, I spotted it, a faint outline against the far wall, almost hidden by shadows and grime. At first, I thought it might be a cracked pipe or an old maintenance panel. But as I drew closer, the outline resolved into a heavy, rusted metal door set into the concrete, unmarked and sealed tight. My breath hitched. This was no part of the standard service tunnel layout I'd memorized. I fumbled for my keys, heart pounding, hands trembling as I tried the lock. It was stubborn at first, but finally gave way with a reluctant creak that echoed unnervingly down the corridor. The door swung open into a chamber unlike anything else in the building. The air inside was colder, heavier, and thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and unsettling. Dim light filtered in from cracks above, casting eerie patterns across the walls, which were covered in faded murals and strange symbols. The floor was uneven, littered with dust and fragments of broken objects, old books, rusted tools, and shards of glass that caught the weak light and scattered it like fractured stars. At the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal, cracked and worn, with an open book resting atop it. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with arcane scripts and illustrations that seemed to shift and writhe as I gazed upon them. A sudden chill brushed my neck, and a whisper echoed faintly, like the murmur of voices long past, urging me forward into secrets best left buried. I realized then that this hidden chamber was a heart to the darkness that haunted Millbrook Academy, a place where the past clung stubbornly, and where I had just crossed a threshold from which there was no turning back. The flickering beam of my flashlight hovered over the ancient book resting on the cracked stone pedestal. The pages, yellowed and fragile with age, seemed almost alive, their delicate script twisting and shifting as if resisting my gaze. The symbols and illustrations sprawled across the parchment were unlike anything I'd seen, cryptic sigils intertwined with unsettling depictions of shadowy figures, silent watchers, and labyrinthine towns ensnaring the unwary. As I traced the inked lines with trembling fingers, I realized this was no ordinary tome. It was a ledger of souls, a record of those who had come to Millbrook and never left. Names etched in a looping, flowing script, alongside dates and strange annotations written in a language half familiar, half arcane. The pages spoke of the collection, an ancient covenant binding restless spirits and living souls alike. According to the text, Millbrook existed at a convergence of realities, a thin place where the veil between the living world and the shadow realm were perilously thin. The mannequins, I now understood, were vessels, empty shells infused with fragments of trapped souls, guardians appointed to guide, judge, and contain. The book recounted the tale of Elias Grayson, the artisan who crafted the first mannequins in a desperate attempt to preserve those lost to time and tragedy. But in doing so, he had opened a rift, inviting forces beyond comprehension. The ledger described rituals meant to contain the darkness, to maintain balance, but warned that the Watchers were neither benevolent nor malevolent, they were entities of order, indifferent to human morality. As I read, a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing my flashlight. In the sudden blackness, the whispers swelled, urgent, pleading, and accusing all at once. I fumbled to relight the beam, heart pounding, knowing I had unearthed a truth that tied me irrevocably to Millbrook's haunted legacy. The book was not just history. It was a warning. And a call. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead, the rhythmic echoes of my footsteps filling the oppressive silence. The steady pulse of my heart was the only thing grounding me as I pushed onward, the familiar concrete walls closing in tighter with every step. Then, clap, clap. The sharp sound of hands striking echoed off the walls, hollow and multiplied by the cavernous space. I froze, flashlight wavering in my grasp, and spun slowly to face the darkness behind me. Nothing but empty passage, stretching far beyond the reach of my light. I swallowed hard, forcing a shaky breath. Maybe it was an echo from somewhere else, or a trick of the acoustics. Yet the cold knot in my gut whispered otherwise. I pressed on, tension coiling in every muscle. Time seemed to warp, the junction I expected never appeared. My watch confirmed it, 10 minutes had passed without change. The tunnel continued straight, longer than any blueprint had shown. Then, clap, clap, clap. 3 deliberate claps came from ahead, each echo spawning dozens more in a haunting chorus. My legs faltered, and I leaned against the rough concrete, heart pounding wildly. The sound faded, but something unseen lingered. Something aware. Turning back was no comfort, the unknown behind me felt heavier than the path ahead. I stepped forward, light trembling over the cold walls, shadows flickering like specters just beyond sight. Suddenly, clap, 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 clap. 4 sharp claps resounded, weaving through the tunnel from impossible directions. The pattern was no accident, measured, musical, an eerie rhythm that gripped my soul. As the echoes died, faint voices emerged, humming a simple, childlike melody twisted into an alien harmony by the tunnel's acoustics. The sound enveloped me, everywhere and nowhere, hypnotic and chilling. Breath caught, vision blurred, I grasped the wall, cold and clammy as if it breathed with decay. The humming swelled, a ghostly choir growing in numbers and intensity. Then, silence. Absolute. Deafening. Even my breathing seemed swallowed by the thick air, a suffocating void. I stood alone in the darkness, caught between worlds, with only the memory of that haunting melody to remind me, some places never forget, and some secrets demand a price. The clapping was a single, sharp sound, close enough that I could feel the rush of air against my face. I froze, flashlight swinging wildly as I jerked backward, but the beam illuminated nothing but the cold, bare walls of the tunnel. My nerves finally snapped. Heart pounding, I turned and ran, feet pounding the concrete in frantic rhythm. Behind me, the clapping rose again, slow at first, then building in tempo and volume until it became a thunderous applause, as if an unseen auditorium had erupted in welcome, or warning. The sound gained on me with every desperate step. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead, mocking my flight. My lungs burned, legs weakening, but the exit door never came into view. The clapping was joined by that haunting childlike humming, ghostly, fragmented, rising and falling in a maddening cacophony. Just as exhaustion threatened to claim me, my flashlight caught the outline of the service door. I lunged forward, shaking so badly I struggled to fit the key in the lock. The door groaned open, and I tumbled into the basement, slamming it shut behind me. Leaning against the cold metal, gasping for air, sweat soaking through my clothes, I felt safer, but not safe. From beyond the door, faint clapping and humming seeped through like water through stone, a spectral performance that refused to end. I backed away, legs trembling, and climbed the stairs to the main floor. The familiar halls of the school felt like sanctuary compared to the tunnel's oppressive darkness. I completed my rounds mechanically, trembling as I checked doors and windows, trying to convince myself it was all hallucination, stress, exhaustion, and the building's eerie atmosphere playing tricks on me. But when I returned an hour later to the boiler room, the clapping and humming echoed faintly through the locked door. I never went back into those tunnels. The next morning, I resigned, citing personal reasons. The headmaster's lack of surprise hinted he'd been expecting it. While clearing out my office, I found a folder tucked behind files. Inside were resignation letters from the 4 guards before me, all brief tenures with vague reasons. The last, from Henderson, my immediate predecessor, held a handwritten note that made my hands shake. The children in the tunnels won't stop their games. They want someone to play with them, but I can't. I won't. Some performances are better left unwitnessed. I replaced the folder and walked away from Millbrook Academy for good. Months later, I still sometimes wake, convinced I hear distant clapping and haunting humming. The performance beneath that ancient building never truly ends. It waits, patient, eternal, marking time with endless, hollow applause. Story 7. Some nights refuse to end the way they began. This was one of those nights. The kind that starts with hope and ends with something crawling under your skin. The lingering hauntings of Millbrook Academy were not simply echoes trapped in brick and mortar, they were living memories etched deep into the bones of the place, stubborn and restless as the wind that howled through its cracked windows. Even after I walked away, the shadows of that night clung to me, threading themselves into the fabric of my dreams and waking moments alike. Millbrook was a nexus of sorrow and silence, where the weight of forgotten histories pressed down like a shroud. The clapping and humming were more than spectral sounds, they were reminders, an unending performance replayed for no audience but those unfortunate enough to hear. It was as if the academy itself mourned, endlessly replaying a tragedy long buried but never resolved. I often found myself haunted by questions without answers. What were these children playing? Were they spirits trapped in an eternal game, cursed to relive their final moments in those cold, narrow tunnels? And what price did the living pay for intruding upon their spectral stage? The resignation letters in that forgotten folder told a silent story of fear passed from one guard to the next, a chain as unbroken as the one that held those ghostly players in place. Each guard left because the academy claimed a part of them, a sliver of their courage, their sanity, their very soul. But perhaps the deepest terror lay not in the apparitions or the eerie sounds, but in the acceptance of the academy's truth, that some places remember. That places like Millbrook do not simply house ghosts, but live with them, breathe them, and in their own way, speak through them. And so, the hauntings persist, not as mere remnants of the past, but as living threads woven into the present, forever binding the academy and those who dare to walk its halls. The spectral maze of Millbrook was a place where time folded upon itself, where the boundaries between the living and the lost blurred until indistinguishable. Those trapped within its endless corridors weren't merely caught, they were woven into the very fabric of the town's restless soul, their fates intertwined with the silent watchers and the ceaseless, haunting chorus. I thought back to the resignation letters, the whispered testimonies of those who tried and failed to endure the academy's grasp. Each guard had become part of the story, they were worn thin by the echoes of clapping hands and the childlike hymns that echoed through the tunnels like a dirge for the forgotten. For those trapped, the maze was not just physical but spiritual. The endless corridors became prisons of memory and regret, where footsteps never led to escape but only deeper into the winding darkness. Faces appeared in reflections, sometimes human, sometimes twisted into haunting caricatures, and voices called from the shadows, luring or warning with equal cruelty. And yet, in the heart of that labyrinth, a strange solace flickered. To surrender was to join a silent communion, a collective trapped between worlds, where resistance gave way to acceptance. Those who accepted became part of the eternal performance, their essence captured in the mannequin's painted eyes, their stories folded into the unending cycle. The watchers, those silent sentinels standing guard in plastic and shadow, were both jailers and keepers, preserving a balance too fragile for human minds to grasp. They waited patiently for the next traveler, the next lost soul whose steps would echo once more through the haunted halls. In that spectral maze, time was a loop, a relentless cadence marked by clapping hands and whispered hymns. Escape was a fading dream, but belonging, however haunting, was forever. The night stretched around me, heavy and suffocating, a dark canvas where every shadow seemed alive with intent. That whisper, David, was no longer just a voice, it was a presence, intimate and invasive, threading itself into the very fabric of my mind. It was silk and steel, both tender and sharp, beautiful yet terrifying. I stumbled forward, senses frayed by the cold October air and the ghost of alcohol fading from my veins. The city felt alien, transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and silence where the ordinary laws of time and space bent uncomfortably. Each step echoed not just once, but twice too many, distorting and stretching, as if unseen footsteps followed just behind me, matching my pace, breathing down my neck. I dared not look back, even though the instinct screamed for me to confront whatever stalked my thoughts. The line of dead street lamps behind me spread darkness like spilled ink, swallowing the world I'd known. Ahead, the path narrowed into a tunnel of blackness that seemed to pulse with quiet menace. The voice came again, closer now, warmer, a breath against my skin that was not mine. "David, don't run." It was no threat, but a plea, or a command, seeping into my bones. My legs moved faster, but my mind spun in tangled confusion, caught between fear and fascination, dread and something darker. I was no longer walking home. I was walking into the depths of a shadow I had carried inside myself for far too long, one that now had a name, and a voice, and a hunger. The night was no longer empty. It was listening. The third light flickered and died just as I reached it, plunging the sidewalk into near-complete darkness. Only the faint glow of distant windows faintly illuminated the street ahead, but the shadows seemed alive, shifting, writhing whenever I glanced at them from the corner of my eye. Garbage cans morphed into crouching figures, fire hydrants twisted into silent predators lurking patiently in the gloom. Every familiar landmark on my nightly walk had transformed into something alien, something hostile. "I've been waiting for you, David." The voice carried an aching longing this time, mingled with a darkness that chilled me to my core. It spoke my name like a twisted prayer, both invocation and curse. My throat felt parched, dry as sandpaper. I swallowed, but no saliva came, just the bitter metallic taste of fear coating my tongue. I broke into a stumbling run. The fourth streetlight sputtered and died as I neared it. Then the fifth, then the sixth. Each extinguished bulb swallowed more of the night, feeding a growing pool of darkness that clung to me like a living shadow. Behind me, soft laughter drifted through the air, musical, cold, utterly devoid of warmth. Finally, my apartment building emerged, a blessed rectangle of light cutting through the consuming dark. The lobby windows glowed softly, and I spotted the familiar figure of the night security guard inside, a mundane beacon in a world gone mad. "Almost home, David. Almost safe." The voice now dripped with mockery, like a cat amused by a desperate mouse scurrying toward a refuge that might be an illusion. The seventh light flickered and died. I was running now, breath ragged, heart pounding furiously, my legs weak as water but propelled by pure terror. The entrance to my building seemed to recede with every step, as if trapped in one of those nightmares where the goal slips further away no matter how fast you move. "You can't escape what's inside you, David." The word struck me like a blow, freezing me mid-stride. What was inside me? I glanced down at my shaking hands, then caught my reflection in a nearby storefront window, a pale, wild-eyed man staring back, a man broken by unseen horrors. The eighth light flickered and died. The security guard continued reading his newspaper, unaware of the abyss encroaching outside. His mundane normalcy almost broke my resolve, a fragile lifeline amid the chaos. "Look at you, David. Running from shadows, running from yourself." The voice whispered in my ear now, step for step, a cold emptiness moving with predatory grace. My peripheral vision caught pale, fluid shapes that vanished the instant I turned to face them. The ninth light died just as I reached the last stretch. I fumbled desperately for my keys, fingers trembling uncontrollably. Behind me, a presence approached, not footsteps, but a suffocating weight pressing down on the air. "David." The voice no longer echoed inside my mind, it came from behind me, spoken aloud by lips that should not exist. The sound was wet, urgent, as if spoken through a mouthful of water. I couldn't turn. Instead, I slammed myself against the glass doors of the lobby, pounding until the security guard looked up, startled. His movements were slow, deliberate, keys jangling as he came to unlock the door. The final streetlight flickered violently. "I'm not going anywhere, David. I'm part of you now." The lock clicked open as the last light died, plunging the street into absolute darkness. The security guard's slow, deliberate movements felt like a cruel taunt against the frantic pounding of my heart. His keys jingled with a haunting rhythm, each metallic chime echoing through the suffocating silence that had swallowed the street. The last flicker of the dying streetlight cast fractured shadows across the glass doors, twisting my reflection into a distorted mask of fear and desperation. As the lock clicked open, a breath of stale, cold air spilled out, carrying with it the faintest hint of something unworldly, an ancient chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I hesitated a moment, the urge to run battling with the crushing weight of exhaustion and dread that pinned me to the spot. The guard stepped aside, his face unreadable, eyes hollow pools reflecting the void behind me. Without a word, I pushed through the door and into the dimly lit lobby, a sanctuary of flickering fluorescent light and worn linoleum tiles that felt both ordinary and impossibly foreign. The oppressive darkness of the street seemed to press against the glass, as if eager to reclaim what it had lost. Behind me, the door slid shut with a soft but final thud, sealing out the night but not the presence that clung to me like a shadow. I stood there, breath ragged, heart still hammering in my chest, acutely aware that the voice was no longer a distant whisper, it was inside me now, entwined with every thought, every heartbeat. "I'm part of you now," it had said. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the darkness wasn't just outside. It was inside. David stood alone in the flickering lobby light, the oppressive silence thickening around him like a tightening noose. The voice, that relentless, invasive whisper, had become a part of his very being, threading through his thoughts, corrupting his memories, and twisting his reality. It was no longer a distant presence stalking the shadows outside, it was an intimate torment, lodged deep within his mind. His first instinct was to resist. To fight. But every attempt to push the voice away felt like wading against a rising tide, exhausting, futile, and terrifying. It seeped into his dreams, turning them into twisted landscapes where the shadows danced with mocking glee and his own reflection sneered back at him with hollow eyes. He sought refuge in routine, clutching desperately to the mundane details of daily life, coffee at dawn, the hum of morning traffic, the mechanical rhythm of work tasks. Yet even these anchors slipped through his grasp as the haunting presence warped time and perception, making hours feel like endless stretches of darkness. At moments, David questioned his sanity. Were the shadows real, or manifestations of a mind unraveling? But the voice was too consistent, too calculating. It spoke with knowledge no hallucination could possess, recalling forgotten moments, secrets he had buried deep. Desperation drove him to seek help, friends, therapists, ancient texts, anything that might offer a lifeline. But the entity was cunning, weaving doubts and fears into his mind, isolating him from those who might save him. In the darkest hours, when the city slept and silence threatened to drown him, David faced the terrifying truth: to reclaim his mind, he must confront the darkness inside, not flee it. The battle was no longer external but within, a labyrinth of memory, guilt, and fear. Each step toward healing demanded courage to face the shadows, to unravel the voice's hold, and to reclaim fragments of a self slipping through his fingers. It was a struggle against a relentless adversary that knew him too well, a test of will where surrender meant becoming forever lost in the void. Yet in that struggle, faint sparks of hope flickered, reminders that even in the deepest darkness, the human spirit can ignite a light strong enough to pierce the shadows. David's days blurred into a relentless tug-of-war between light and shadow within his mind. Each morning, waking was a small victory, a fragile moment where the voice's grip loosened just enough for clarity to seep through the fog. But as the sun dipped, the shadows gathered strength, whispering doubts that gnawed at his resolve. He sought solace in quiet places, the hum of a library, the rustle of pages turning, the steady cadence of his own breathing during meditation. These moments offered brief reprieves, pockets of peace where the invasive whispers softened into distant echoes. But peace was fleeting, like water slipping through clenched fingers. David began journaling, pouring fragmented memories and feelings onto paper, weaving words as a shield against the encroaching darkness. In the act of writing, he confronted buried pain, the rejection, the loneliness, the self-doubt, the raw wounds the voice fed upon. Each sentence was a step out of the labyrinth, a thread unraveling the tangled snare. Therapy sessions opened new doors. A compassionate voice outside his own mind offered perspectives he'd long denied, tools to challenge the lies whispered by the haunting presence. Gradually, David learned to name the shadows, not as invincible monsters, but as fractured parts of himself craving acknowledgement and healing. Yet progress was jagged. Nights were battlegrounds where the voice screamed its cruelest taunts, trying to drag him back into despair. Sleep became a precious refuge and a fearful abyss. Dreams twisted into surreal trials, corridors folding into themselves, faces morphing into grotesque parodies of those he loved. But with each dawn, David rose anew. The voice's power ebbed and flowed, never vanishing but diminished, a shadow retreating before a stubborn, growing light. He learned to ground himself in the present, the feel of cold air on skin, the taste of bitter coffee, the warmth of sunlight through a window. These anchors tethered him to reality, fracturing the voice's hold. In moments of quiet strength, David envisioned the voice as a shadowed figure on the edge of a vast forest, ominous, yes, but no longer a puppeteer pulling his strings. He took tentative steps away, leaving footprints of courage behind. His journey toward liberation was neither linear nor swift. It was a slow, arduous reclaiming of self, where every small victory kindled hope. And in the depths of his struggle, David discovered a profound truth: even when haunted by darkness, the human spirit harbors a resilience capable of rekindling light from the deepest shadows. The moment I burst through the lobby door, my body trembled uncontrollably. The security guard reached out, gripping my arm gently but firmly, his concern etched deep into his features. His voice, though steady, sounded muffled, as if I was hearing him from underwater. He asked if I was all right, if I needed someone called, but I barely registered the words. My gaze was fixed behind me, on the glass doors, beyond which the street lay swallowed in unnatural darkness. Yet within that black void, shapes stirred, pale, fluid forms that danced and writhed in patterns too disturbing to look at directly. The voice was inside now, inside the lobby, inside me. I'm still here, David. I'll always be here. I blinked, startled, and saw in the glass reflection the faint outline of a woman, translucent, shifting like smoke. Her face was blurred, indistinct, but those eyes, dark, bottomless holes, seemed to reach deep into my chest, pulling at something buried and raw. I blinked again. She was gone. The security guard was still there, solid, grounded in reality, asking again if he should call the police. The lobby buzzed with the familiar hum of fluorescent lights and distant traffic. But when I looked back at the doors, I saw only my own pale, shaking reflection, the eyes of a man who had glimpsed too much darkness. Outside, one by one, streetlights flickered back to life, as though someone were retracing my steps, undoing the darkness that had pursued me. Until tomorrow night, David. The voice faded, sinking beneath the city's ambient noises, but I knew it would return. Whatever had found me on that dark street was not finished. It had followed me home, insinuated itself into the space between my thoughts and fears. I thanked the guard, voice hollow, and took the elevator up to the 14th floor. As the doors slid shut, the polished metal reflected not only me but, just for a breath, a shadowed figure standing behind. I whipped around, but the elevator was empty. My apartment greeted me in its quiet stillness, unchanged since hours before when my greatest worry had been finding the courage to speak to a woman in a bar. But now, I understood, some rejections are mercies cloaked in pain. At the window, I watched the street bathed in familiar light, alive with the ordinary silence of night. Then, across the street, a figure emerged, tall, pale, distinctly feminine. Beneath a glowing street lamp, she looked up at my window. Though I was 14 floors high, her gaze bore down with inhuman patience. She lifted a hand, a wave, a promise, and melted back into the shadows. I closed the curtains, double-locked the door, but I knew it was futile. Locks and curtains meant nothing here. This presence had made its home in the space between nightmare and reality. And it would wait for me with every sunset. "See you tomorrow night, David." A whisper, barely above breath, but unmistakably there. I poured a drink, hands steadying for the first time, and settled into my chair to wait for dawn. Outside, the city danced its endless ballet of light and shadow, unaware that something new had been born in its darkest corners. Something that knew my name. And had all the time in the world to teach me what that truly meant. Night wrapped around the city like a velvet shroud as David sat alone in his apartment, the faint hum of distant traffic barely masking the weight pressing down on his chest. The drink in his hand trembled slightly, not from alcohol, but from anticipation. He knew the darkness was waiting. Always waiting. As the clock ticked past midnight, the air grew colder, an invisible frost creeping along the edges of the room. The shadows in the corners deepened, shifting subtly, as if breathing. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper slithered through the silence, calling his name, David. His heart surged, muscles tensed, but he forced himself to remain still, grounding his racing thoughts. The glow from the street lamp outside flickered once, twice, then steadied, casting long, uneasy shapes that danced across the walls. From the depths of the darkness, the figure emerged. Not fully formed, but a shifting silhouette, fluid as smoke, pale as moonlight, with eyes like obsidian voids that seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. She moved with deliberate grace, footsteps silent on the floor as she approached. "Why do you run from me?" Her voice was a melody threaded with sorrow and something infinitely older, an echo from a time when light and shadow had not yet drawn their eternal line. David's breath caught, the room tightening around him like the coils of a serpent. Yet, beneath the terror, a fragile thread of resolve unfurled within him. "I don't want this," he whispered. "I want to live free of you." She tilted her head, a smile both haunting and tender. "We are bound, you and I. You carry what cannot be shed." A chill surged through him, but David steadied his voice. "Then teach me. Show me how to break the chain." Her eyes softened, and the shadows around her pulsed with ancient light. "To break the chain, you must first understand what binds you. The darkness you fear is but a reflection, the part of yourself forgotten, feared, yet necessary." The room seemed to dissolve, the walls fading into swirling mist. Memories, half-forgotten and painful, surged through David's mind, rejections, losses, regrets, the roots of the shadow that had claimed him. "I am not your enemy," she whispered. "I am the keeper of your truths, the guardian of what you refuse to face." David swallowed his fear, feeling for the first time a strange kinship with the haunting presence. The night stretched endlessly, a liminal space where light and dark danced in fragile balance. And in that suspended moment, David took his first step toward reclaiming himself, not by fleeing the shadows, but by walking into them with open eyes and an unyielding heart. The shadows curled around the room like smoke as the figure drifted closer, her presence a paradox, both comforting and unsettling. David's pulse raced, yet beneath the fear was a fragile hope, a whispered promise that perhaps this darkness was not solely his tormentor, but something more complex. She reached out, not with hands of flesh, but with tendrils of shadow that brushed lightly against his cheek, cool and whisper-thin. The touch sent a shiver through his spine, not of dread, but of awakening. "I am not here to consume you, David," she murmured, her voice a soft echo that seemed to resonate within his very bones. "I am the keeper of your broken parts, the silent witness to your pain and your truths. Together, we hold a fragile balance." He swallowed hard, struggling to steady his voice. "But why me? Why haunt me so relentlessly?" Her eyes, dark pools reflecting eternity, seemed to peer into the depths of his soul. "Because you are the crossroads, the place where light and shadow meet. To deny me is to deny a part of yourself. To embrace me is to begin the journey toward wholeness. David's mind reeled with the weight of her words. The voice that had once shattered his peace now spoke of unity and understanding. But trust was a fragile thread, easily severed. "What if I'm not ready?" he whispered. "What if the darkness is too much?" She smiled, a haunting curve that held both sorrow and strength. "Then I will wait. I will be here in the shadows, patient and eternal. But the choice is yours, embrace the shadow and find your light, or reject it and remain lost in the endless night." The room seemed to pulse with an otherworldly rhythm, the veil between worlds thinning in her presence. For the first time, David felt not just fear, but the stirrings of courage, a tentative spark amid the encroaching darkness. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and touched the shadow that lingered at her form's edge. It was neither cold nor warm, just a sensation of profound stillness. "I want to try," he said softly. Her form shimmered, and a gentle warmth spread through the room, easing the tightness in his chest. "Then begin. Together." As the first fragile steps of their alliance unfolded, David knew the path ahead would be neither easy nor swift. But for the first time, the shadow was not a prison, it was a guide. And in that tenuous bond between light and dark, hope was born. The scent lingered stubbornly in the sterile air, an unyielding presence that defied all logic. Marcus Webb wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, telling himself it was nothing more than fatigue, or perhaps a malfunctioning ventilation system. Yet, deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. That night, at home, the memory of the burning candle's warmth and the whispered word haunted the edges of his consciousness. He tried to dismiss it as an overworked mind's trick, but sleep was elusive, his dreams fractured by shadows that flickered like candle flames. The next day at Meridian Industries, Marcus returned to the labyrinthine basement, fluorescent lights humming overhead, pipes dripping steadily. The alarms beeped as usual, sharp and piercing, cutting through the constant mechanical drone. Then, again, the scent, soft, sweet, unmistakable. "Congratulations." This time, the voice was clearer, resonant with a gentle pride that tugged at something buried inside him. Marcus froze, his fingers hovering over the control panel. The air around him thickened, charged with an energy that seemed both inviting and ominous. He scanned the room again, eyes narrowing on the shadows pooling in the corners. Nothing moved, yet the feeling of being watched pressed down like a physical weight. Determined to regain control, Marcus resumed his work, forcing his mind away from the inexplicable sensations. But the presence lingered, a quiet companion in the vast, echoing chamber, a whisper of something beyond the world he knew. Days passed, each visit weaving the scent and voice deeper into his reality, blurring the line between scientific precision and supernatural mystery. Marcus began to question what he was really testing, not just alarms and sensors, but the fragile boundary between perception and the unseen. The voice that haunted the sterile corridors of Meridian Industries was older than the building itself, a whisper carried on the breath of forgotten time, woven into the very foundations beneath the cold concrete floor. To understand its origin, Marcus would have to delve far beyond gas detectors and synthetic smoke, into shadows cast long before the facility's walls rose. Decades ago, before the office building became a testing center, the site had been home to a chapel, an ancient sanctuary dedicated to light and renewal. Locals spoke in hushed tones of a devoted caretaker, a woman named Alara, who tended the chapel's flickering candles with reverence, her presence a comforting beacon in the darkest nights. But tragedy struck when a devastating fire engulfed the chapel, consuming its wood and wax, and taking Alara with it. Her final act was said to be a whispered blessing, a vow that the light would never truly die, even in the face of darkness. The chapel's ashes were buried beneath layers of concrete and steel, but Alara's spirit remained, a guardian of flame and hope, tethered to the site by devotion and unfinished duty. Her essence had permeated the very air, lingering like the scent of melting wax, her voice a gentle echo of congratulations to those who carried on the legacy of vigilance. But over time, as the chapel's purpose was replaced by machines and tests, the spirit's warmth twisted into something more ambiguous, a presence both comforting and unsettling, reaching out through the sterile walls to touch the living. The voice Marcus heard was not merely praise, it was a reminder of the thin veil between light and shadow, life and death, safety and danger. Ilara's whisper was a paradox, a blessing entwined with a warning, urging vigilance not just against physical threats but against the creeping darkness within and without. As Marcus pieced together the history, he realized the voice was a guardian and a guide, beckoning him toward a deeper awareness, one that transcended the alarms and sensors he tested daily. The laboratory was no longer just a place of science, but a crossroads where the past bled into the present, and unseen forces watched silently through the veil. The procedures, the concrete reality of electronic circuits and calibrated instruments, once so grounding, now felt fragile, like a thin veneer stretched over an abyss. Each alarm's sharp beat, once a mundane cue, became a trigger for tension, a precursor to the haunting sensory symphony that relentlessly followed. For 3 days, the phantom congratulation seemed to sleep, and with it, a fragile sense of normalcy returned. Marcus allowed himself to laugh during lunch, chalking the experience up to caffeine-fueled exhaustion and the isolating monotony of his work environment. Yet beneath the laughter, unease simmered, a silent shadow in the back of his mind. Then, on Thursday morning, the laboratory's sterile order was shattered once more. Testing a new batch of carbon monoxide detectors, Marcus triggered the alarm, its shrill call slicing through the quiet hum. Immediately, the air thickened with the rich sweetness of vanilla candles, the genuine aroma of melting wax and fragrant beans, so vivid it clung to his senses like a warm embrace and a cold warning intertwined. His breath hitched. His skin prickled with cold sweat. Gripping the testing console until his knuckles blanched, Marcus waited, expecting, fearing the inevitable whisper. "Congratulations." The word lingered longer this time, drawn out with an affection that sent a shudder through his spine. The warmth of breath brushed his ear, the faintest whisper of movement followed as if someone had just stepped away. He spun, startled, knocking reports to the floor. Yet the laboratory was vast and empty, the hum of fluorescent lights and metal ventilation the only companions. No hiding place. No shadow deep enough to conceal a soul. No explanation. The cold tightness in his throat remained as he sought refuge in a cup of water, but the sweetness lingered, vanilla wax settling stubbornly in his nostrils, a haunting perfume he could neither escape nor forget. In the days that followed, the hauntings intensified. The phantom candle scents morphed, vanilla gave way to birthday cake candles, plastic and colorful, and hints of chocolate frosting or strawberry ice cream floated like spectral invitations to forgotten celebrations. The voice evolved from a single utterance to a chorus, overlapping, dissonant, multi-aged and multi-gendered, swirling around him in a maddening symphony of praise. Tactile sensations accompanied the auditory and olfactory onslaught, gentle pats on his shoulders, reassuring touches along his back, ghostly congratulations that dissolved the moment he searched for their source. Empty air. Unseen hands. Night brought little respite. Sleep fractured into restless vigil, each memory dissected in the harsh light of midnight thoughts. By day, Marcus was jumpy, hyper-aware, haunted not only by the unseen chorus but by his own spiraling doubt. Security logs confirmed solitude, but the sensation of unseen eyes persisted. His work, once fluid and automatic, fractured under the weight of distraction. Simple calibrations became monumental tasks requiring every ounce of concentration. And through it all, the haunting congratulations continued, a spectral echo in Twi. Drawn by a mixture of dread and curiosity, Marcus began to dig into the history of the Meridian Industries facility. Late nights at the local library and long hours poring over dusty archives became his new routine. He uncovered fragments of the building's past. Once, decades ago, it had housed a small chapel, a sanctuary where workers and townsfolk alike sought solace and light. Among the faded records, one name surfaced repeatedly: Ilara, the chapel's devoted caretaker. She was known for tending the chapel's candles with a reverent dedication, her presence a beacon of warmth in dark times. Local whispers spoke of her tragic death in a devastating fire that consumed the chapel's wooden interior, taking her with the flickering flames. Legend held that her spirit lingered, bound to the place by a promise, that the light she guarded would never be extinguished. Marcus realized the scent of burning candles and the whispered congratulations were echoes of Alara's enduring presence, her way of acknowledging vigilance and perseverance, yet also a reminder of a duty left unfinished. The sterile, mechanical laboratory had become a vessel for this lingering spirit, the very air infused with her essence. This revelation deepened the mystery. The hauntings were not malevolent but a spectral manifestation of commitment and protection, twisted by time and the cold walls that now encased them. The alarms Marcus tested became more than instruments, they were a bridge between the living and the spectral, a conduit for Alara's eternal watch. But as the voices' warmth mingled with an eerie insistence, Marcus felt the weight of an unspoken pact, one that demanded acknowledgement, understanding, and perhaps a price yet to be revealed. Instead, it was something far more complex, an echo of joy and innocence trapped beneath layers of concrete and steel, a lingering residue of countless celebrations now twisted into a spectral performance. This presence wasn't merely haunting, it was reliving, endlessly replaying moments of happiness and recognition long past, yet unreachable. Marcus understood then that he wasn't facing a spirit of vengeance or malice, but a remnant of collective memory, a consciousness formed from the accumulation of human emotions tethered to that very space. The applause, the scent, the voices, they were fragments of joy seeking acknowledgement, but their eternal repetition had warped into an overwhelming, suffocating insistence. The shadowy figures that surrounded him in that terrifying moment were not tormentors but silent witnesses, guardians of forgotten celebrations, yearning for a connection, for validation. Yet, their presence was disorienting, a surreal juxtaposition against the sterile, mechanical world Marcus inhabited daily. This realization deepened his isolation. How could he explain to anyone the weight of invisible witnesses applauding his every move? The invisible crowd's demand for recognition was both a blessing and a curse, pulling him into a liminal space between reality and the spectral echoes of the past. As he delved further into the history of the building and the emotions it harbored, Marcus began to sense that his role transcended that of a mere technician. He had become an unwitting participant in a story much older and far stranger than he had imagined, one where science and the supernatural intertwined, where the past whispered through alarms and candles, where celebration and dread danced in uneasy harmony. This profound shift settled over Marcus like a quiet dawn breaking through a long night. The spectral applause no longer felt like an intrusion, it became a sacred hymn, a chorus of unseen allies echoing the gravity of his daily tasks. Each beep of the alarms resonated beyond machinery, bridging two realms, the tangible world of wires and circuits, and the ethereal world where those echoes of past celebrations lived on. Marcus found himself embracing the rhythm of this strange communion. His work gained new layers of meaning, not just a series of mechanical tests, but a ritual shared with entities bound by time and memory, whose very existence revolved around acknowledgement and gratitude. He felt honored, chosen in a way, to be the conduit of their unfinished stories and enduring hopes. Yet with this partnership came responsibility. He knew the spirit's presence was tied to the essence of protection, the very purpose behind every detector and alarm he calibrated. Their gratitude was more than nostalgic, it was a recognition of his role in a continuum where safety, memory, and unseen guardianship converged. Each visit to the laboratory became a pilgrimage, every alarm test a sacrament. The phantom voices, once dissonant and eerie, now formed a symphony of support, urging Marcus onward in his vital task. The candle scents, vanilla, chocolate, birthday cake, transformed from haunting reminders to gentle embraces, wrapping him in the warmth of countless celebrations past. Still, Marcus remained vigilant. This communion was delicate, balanced on the edge between comfort and obsession. The boundary between his reality and theirs thinned dangerously at times, and he grappled with the weight of their silent watch. But he no longer walked alone. The shadows had become his companions, and in their applause, he heard not just echoes of the past, but a call to purpose, one that illuminated even the darkest corners of his weary world. The figure didn't respond to my voice, he remained motionless except for the gentle, rhythmic movement of his shoulders. The hazy vapor around him seemed to pulse softly, like the faintest heartbeat suspended in the stale air. I blinked, forcing my eyes to adjust, but the man did not waver, nor did the apparition fade. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This was no ordinary customer forgotten in the closing rush. This presence felt tethered to the place, as if he belonged to the shadows themselves, an echo of nights long past, a lingering fragment of memory caught in a perpetual moment. I approached cautiously, each step echoing against the tiled floor, my breath shallow and uneven. The scent of fried food faded beneath a faint undertone, something ancient and intangible, like old paper or dried flowers pressed in forgotten books. The atmosphere grew heavier with every inch I closed the distance. "Sir." My voice cracked under the weight of my fear and disbelief. Are you all right?" The figure finally turned his head slowly. His eyes, cloudy with age but burning with a quiet sorrow, met mine. There was a recognition there, a silent communication that passed between us, wordless yet profound. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound emerged. Then, in the hush of the empty restaurant, a whisper drifted through the air, not from his mouth, but from the space around us. A fragile, melancholic melody woven from the echoes of laughter, clinking glasses, and distant conversations. A memory, a haunting refrain of joy now dimmed by time. My heart ached as understanding settled like a heavy fog. This was a visitor from another era, a soul still entwined with the place where countless celebrations and stories had unfolded. The weight of forgotten histories pressed down, pressing me to bear witness. The figure's shoulders rose and fell once more, and then, with a gesture as delicate as a sigh, he faded into the shadows, leaving behind only the faintest trace of his presence, a bittersweet reminder that some places hold memories too deep to ever fully leave. I stood alone, the silence around me thick and reverent, knowing that in this quiet restaurant, I had glimpsed a fragile thread connecting the present to a past that still whispered through the empty tables. Every familiar landmark warped before my eyes, the soda fountain twisted into a grotesque spiral, the cashier's counter stretched impossibly long. The exit, once a beacon of escape, flickered between open and closed states, teasing me with false hope. My breath came in ragged gasps as the oppressive hum crescendoed into a near-deafening chorus, vibrating through my very bones. Shapes flickered in the corners of my vision, shadowy figures that dissolved when I tried to focus, as if the space itself refused to hold their form. The medicinal scent deepened, now tinged with a metallic sharpness that prickled my skin. I felt drawn backward, toward table 20, as if some invisible tether pulled me to that burning surface and the vacant chair beside it. My hands trembled uncontrollably, cold sweat pooling at my temples. A whisper floated through the static-laden air, indistinct words, like fragments of old conversations, half-remembered laughter, and the sighs of ghosts long departed. The vapor thickened, swirling into ethereal shapes that coalesced into the faint outline of a man sitting once more, head bowed, wiping his forehead. Though intangible, his presence was undeniable, a spectral anchor binding the past to the present. I realized then that this place was alive with memories, emotional residues that had etched themselves onto the very fabric of the space, playing out rituals of recognition and farewell on endless loop. I wanted to flee, to break free of this haunted theater, but my feet were rooted as if by unseen chains. The restaurant's fluorescent lights flickered again, casting harsh, erratic shadows that danced like mocking specters. In that moment, I understood, the hauntings were not random. They were a manifestation of lives lived and lost here, silent stories seeking witness, gratitude, or release. And I was the latest reluctant participant in their endless, haunting performance. The following night, the weight of anticipation pressed down on me even before I stepped through the front door of the restaurant. The streets outside seemed quieter, the shadows deeper and more patient, as if the world itself held its breath in expectation. Each footstep echoed like a heartbeat, resonating through the empty building with uncanny clarity. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, their usual harshness softened into a muted glow that felt less like illumination and more like a dim veil drawn over the familiar space. Table 20 awaited, a silent altar in the center of the dining room, its surface still warm beneath my gaze, pulsing with the strange rhythm I had come to recognize. The chair, pushed back just so, held the ghostly impression like a faded photograph pressed between pages, a reminder of presence and absence entwined. The vapor swirled gently, coalescing once again into shifting faces that smiled with sorrow and longing, as if caught in a dance between worlds. I approached slowly, heart hammering against ribs like a trapped animal desperate for release. The candle scents wrapped around me, blending vanilla, wax, and something indefinably ancient, a fragrance that spoke of memories too deep for words. Then the applause began again, not the dry echoes of the first nights, but a fuller, richer sound, as if 100 unseen hands had gathered to celebrate my arrival. The voices joined in, whispering congratulations that tumbled and overlapped in a haunting chorus. I whispered my thanks, voice trembling yet sincere, and in that moment felt the fragile bond between us deepen, a communion born of recognition and respect, a shared ritual stretching across the veil of time. But beneath the warmth, an undercurrent of sadness pulsed steadily. This place was a liminal space, a threshold where joy and grief intertwined, where the living and the departed wove their stories into a tapestry neither could fully unravel. I sat down at table 20, fingers brushing the wood grain, feeling the subtle vibrations beneath the surface, a heartbeat in the stillness. The faces in the vapor turned toward me, their smiles bittersweet, welcoming me into their endless performance. And as I settled into that strange communion, I knew with both dread and comfort that the restaurant, the memories, and the spirits would hold me as long as I remained willing to listen, a guardian of forgotten celebrations, a witness to the eternal dance of light and shadow. The elevator seemed alive with a sinister purpose, its open maw beckoning me with a silence that was louder than any scream. The air around it was thick with decay, and the sickly sweet scent of antiseptic mixed with something far fouler, something metallic, coppery, and ancient. I could feel the building itself watching, waiting, as if St. Mary's held secrets buried in its very bones, eager to reveal them only to those brave, or foolish, enough to listen. The dripping slowed, then stopped altogether, leaving a hollow stillness so profound it pressed against my eardrums. I stood frozen, flashlight trembling in my hand, caught between the primal urge to flee and a growing compulsion to step inside. The elevator's dim lights flickered once more, casting elongated shadows that twisted and stretched like reaching fingers. Then, without warning, the floor beneath the gloves shifted. A faint, wet squelch echoed, as if something stirred just beneath the latex sea. My heart pounded in my chest like a frantic drum, each beat a warning and a summons. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped closer, the heels of my boots sinking slightly into the rubbery carpet of torn gloves. The air grew colder, every breath a visible ghost that mingled with the rising vapor of forgotten pain and whispered sorrows. Suddenly, the elevator doors slid closed with a final, grinding slam, plunging me into darkness broken only by the beam of my flashlight. A soft mechanical whir began again, louder now, accompanied by a low, almost human sigh that seemed to seep through the walls and into my bones. As the elevator jolted, beginning a descent into unknown depths, I realized the building's breath was no longer just a metaphor. St. Mary's was alive in its own terrible way, a vessel of memories and suffering that demanded to be heard. The descent was slow, agonizing, each floor passing without stopping. Between flickers of light, I glimpsed fleeting images, faint figures in hospital gowns, pale hands reaching through cracked walls, and the haunting glow of surgical instruments abandoned but never forgotten. The scent of burning candles returned, mingling with the coppery decay, wrapping around me like a shroud. The voices whispered again, but now in fragmented phrases, begging for release, offering warnings, murmuring secrets only half remembered. I clutched the handrail, knuckles white, my mind a turbulent sea of fear and fascination. This was no longer a simple security job. I had entered the heart of a spectral labyrinth, where time and reality warped under the weight of lost souls. When the elevator finally shuddered to a halt, the doors slid open to reveal a corridor bathed in an unearthly blue glow, walls lined with faded photographs of patients and staff, faces frozen in time, eyes seemingly alive, watching, waiting. And there, standing at the corridor's end, was a figure, tall, thin, shrouded in a threadbare hospital gown, face obscured by shadow, but unmistakably human. The air hummed with an unspoken invitation and a chilling promise. I stepped forward, knowing that whatever awaited me beyond this point was not just the past's echo, but a living nightmare that would challenge the very limits of my courage, and my sanity. The beam of my flashlight revealed a thin film of water pooling across the steps, reflecting the wavering light like a shattered mirror. It shimmered unnaturally, as if alive, moving in slow, deliberate ripples that defied any breeze or vibration. The air grew heavier still, thick with an oppressive humidity that clung to my skin like a second, wet layer. A chill deeper than the cold I'd felt before seeped into my bones, crawling up my spine and settling behind my eyes. The silence, once broken only by dripping and the elevator's mechanical moans, was now filled with something else, a faint, sorrowful melody, almost like a lullaby sung by unseen lips. My heart hammered in my chest, echoing the rhythm of the dripping water and the pulsing warmth from the table back in the restaurant. The footsteps of something, or someone, slithered just out of sight, its presence pressing against the edge of my perception. The ghostly applause, the whispered congratulations, the warmth and cold all intertwined, binding me to this haunted place with invisible threads. I swallowed hard, steeling myself to descend into the unknown depths below, aware that every step might draw me closer to truths better left unspoken. The drip, drip, drip continued, now a haunting heartbeat that marked time in a prison where the past and present were forever entwined. As I stepped down onto the slick stair, the water shifted, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a pale, trembling hand reach out from the darkness beneath, beckoning me to follow deeper into St. Mary's spectral labyrinth. The stairwell felt colder than before, the chill crawling beneath my skin like unseen fingers tracing every nerve ending. Each step down echoed hollowly, amplifying the silence that had replaced the sinister drip. My mind raced, desperate to push away the images I'd witnessed, the faces beneath the water, their silent screams, the hands reaching out, begging for release or warning. As I reached the lobby, the fluorescent lights buzzed weakly, flickering in a rhythm that seemed synchronized with my racing heartbeat. The familiar hum of the building's ventilation systems did little to comfort me. The oppressive atmosphere clung tightly, a suffocating reminder that I was no longer just a visitor to this place, I was now tethered to its haunted past, part of the unfolding tragedy etched into every cracked tile and peeling wall. I paused before the exit door, my fingers trembling as they hovered over the handle. Outside was the cold, merciless night, a world of logic and safety, or so I hoped. But I knew, deep down, that leaving would not sever the invisible chains now binding me to the hospital's spectral web. The scent of metallic blood and wax lingered faintly behind me as I stepped out, swallowed by the night's darkness. The city's sounds felt muted, distant, as if I had passed through a veil between realities. Somewhere in the recesses of my mind, the whispered warning echoed still, "Don't let them know you know." With every breath, every heartbeat, I understood that the truth I had glimpsed was a burden that could neither be ignored nor easily escaped. And as the shadows lengthened and the night deepened, I knew the story of St. Mary's was far from over, and that my own fate was now inextricably woven into its endless, haunting lament. The surface, once a perfect mirror of the dawn, shimmered with a subtle distortion. My reflection blinked after me, a heartbeat too late, its eyes holding a strange, knowing glint that wasn't my own. The outline of my figure seemed to ripple and stretch, as if the water beneath was trying to communicate in a language just beyond my comprehension. For a moment, I thought I saw something else, a second shadow slipping beneath the surface, unseen but unmistakably present. Unease prickled at my skin like cold raindrops on a warm day. I shook my head, forcing the sensation away, but the image clung stubbornly to my mind. I pressed forward, each step heavier than the last, the rhythmic slap of my shoes on gravel now a dissonant echo in the thick morning air. The mist thickened, swallowing the edges of the reservoir, turning familiar shapes into ghostly silhouettes. The world around me felt muted, colors drained, as though I had stepped into a painting faded by time. A low, almost inaudible hum began to fill the silence, a vibration felt more in the bones than heard by the ears. It rose slowly, like a tide, pressing against my senses, warping reality's edges. That's when I saw it, just beyond the veil of mist, a figure standing motionless at the water's edge. Tall, draped in something dark and flowing, the form seemed carved from shadow itself. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but I felt its gaze pierce through the fog directly into me. I froze, heart hammering wildly, breath caught in my throat. The world seemed to hold its breath alongside me. A whisper floated on the breeze, soft and sibilant, a word I could not quite catch. Yet its meaning settled deep within me, a chilling truth I was reluctant to face. The reservoir was not just a body of water, it was a threshold, a mirror between worlds, a resting place for forgotten secrets and waiting spirits. And today, it had chosen to reveal itself to me. The runner I saw in the reflection was no longer just a shadow. It was a warning, a summons, and an invitation into a story that was only just beginning. The footsteps haunted me, a relentless echo tethered to my own movement, yet defying every rational explanation. I dared not stop again, knowing that if I did, the silence behind me would swell, thick and suffocating, pressing into my skin like a living thing waiting to claim me. As I pushed forward, each breath labored and shallow, the mist curled and writhed beside the reservoir like smoke in slow motion. The boundary between the world I knew and the shadow beneath the water blurred, dissolving into something fluid and unknowable. My eyes darted constantly to the surface, searching for that backwards running reflection, that mirrored self that defied nature's laws. Sometimes it flickered there, an impossible twin dancing against the mist. Other times, the water was a perfect glass, cold and still, mocking me with its deceptive calm. Ahead, the dam loomed, a solid wall cutting across the reservoir like a scar. The fog wrapped around it in ghostly veils, softening its harsh lines into something dreamlike and menacing all at once. I reached the edge and peered down into the black depths beneath, where the water swirled with unseen currents and whispered secrets. A shiver traced my spine as the footsteps behind me slowed, then stopped, just like before. The mist shifted, thickening as if something, or someone, was rising from the depths to reveal itself. And then I heard it, a voice, low and fractured, almost a sigh on the wind. It spoke my name, a breath on the edge of hearing, a promise and a warning tangled together. David, you belong beneath. The chill in the air deepened, the line between waking and nightmare dissolving completely. The reservoir was no longer just water and mist. It was a gate. A mirror. A trap. And I was standing at its threshold, caught between the running man and the shadow that ran against him in the depths. The weight of that realization settled over me like a suffocating fog. The reflection I had once trusted, my silent, faithful double, was no longer tethered to my reality. Somewhere beneath the surface of that cold reservoir, it had slipped free, gaining autonomy in a shadow world where the rules bent and time unraveled. At times, I catch fleeting glimpses of its presence in the periphery of my vision, a subtle distortion of what should be familiar. A blink delayed, a smile just a moment too slow, a hesitation where certainty should reside. It's learning, evolving, adapting, studying me as a shadow studies light, both inseparable yet fundamentally apart. I find myself questioning everything I thought I knew about identity, about self. Am I merely a reflection of that unseen other? Or is it a fractured part of me, seeking freedom from the constraints of my waking life? The boundaries blur, and with each passing day, the line between us grows thinner, threatening to vanish entirely. Yet in this eerie dance with the unknown, there's a strange, painful beauty. The mirror no longer holds just an image, it holds a story, a secret world where reflections dream and run backward through mist-shrouded waters, unbound by the laws that govern us. And so I live suspended between two realities, one foot planted firmly in the world I recognize, the other chasing a shadow across the depths of an invisible, parallel existence. Waiting. Watching. Wondering how long before the reflection turns around and steps out from the glass, claiming the life that was once mine. The mechanical figures were relics from a time when these toys brought laughter and joy, now twisted into eerie sentinels of a forgotten past. Their joints creaked faintly with the slightest disturbance in the air, though they remained motionless, as if bound by invisible strings. The stillness was suffocating, as if the warehouse itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to break the silence. I scanned the semicircle, noting the fine dust coating each figure, the cracked paint revealing layers of neglect and time. Yet, despite their decay, those painted eyes seemed almost alive, shimmering with a light that was not reflected but intrinsic, as if memories had seeped into their very plastic and metal. A sudden chill swept through the aisle, and the overhead lights flickered violently. For a moment, the mechanical bear's mouth opened, emitting a hollow, distorted melody that twisted into a jarring, dissonant note before silence swallowed it again. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was a glitch, a malfunction from decades of disuse. Yet deep inside, a gnawing certainty whispered that these weren't mere toys abandoned to time, they were vessels, waiting, watching, remembering. The sense of being observed grew stronger, wrapping around me like icy fingers. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, pooling around the shelves as if drawn to the figure's silent presence. I glanced over my shoulder and caught the faintest movement, a flicker of a doll's head, a blink from glass eyes, a whisper of a smile on painted lips. Steeling myself, I pressed deeper into the warehouse, tablet forgotten in my numb hand. Each step echoed with a weight that wasn't just physical but spiritual, a reminder that some places don't simply hold forgotten objects, they hold stories, emotions, and remnants of souls tethered beyond their time. What had drawn me here? What force kept the warehouse alive with such eerie vigilance? I didn't yet know. But as I stood in that dim, humming cathedral of lost childhood, I understood one thing with crushing clarity: in Wonderland toys, the past never truly dies. It waits, patient and watchful, ready to reach out and touch the present in ways no one expects, and no one escapes unscathed. A cold shiver traced down my spine as the bear's glassy eyes locked onto me. The mechanical whirring echoed like a slow heartbeat through the cavernous warehouse, mingling with the harsh hum of the fluorescent lights now fully awakened. The bear's painted smile, once lifeless and benign, seemed to curl with sinister intent, a grotesque mimicry of joy. I stumbled back, heart hammering so fiercely it threatened to burst through my chest. Every instinct screamed to flee, but my legs refused to move. The animatronic bear's slow, deliberate movements were unlike anything mechanical, they held an eerie sentience, as though it was aware not just of its own form, but of me, an intruder in its domain. The clown and cowboy figures remained still, but the air around them pulsed with an unseen energy. I could almost feel the weight of their gaze, like a collective consciousness awakening from decades of dormancy. Shadows twisted and lengthened beneath the shelves, writhing as if stirred by the bear's animation. A faint, spectral glow began to emanate from the bear's eyes, bathing the surrounding space in an unnatural light that distorted the warehouse's familiar contours. The air thickened, heavy with the mingled scents of melted wax and aged plastic, a haunting perfume of lost childhoods and forgotten laughter. The bear's jaw continued its silent pantomime, lips moving to an inaudible chant that sent tremors through the air. A sudden breeze, impossible in the sealed warehouse, swept past me, carrying whispers that swirled like fragile ghosts. They spoke in fragmented phrases, half-remembered songs, and distant echoes of applause, as if the entire history of joy and fear bound to these toys was awakening, seeking release. I knew then that this was no ordinary malfunction. The warehouse was a vessel, a haunted reliquary for memories and emotions long past, trapped in plastic and circuitry, yearning for recognition. And I, a solitary intruder, had stirred them from their slumber. My breath hitched, and with a trembling hand, I reached to retrieve my tablet, now lying cracked on the concrete. The bear's eyes flared brighter, as if responding to my hesitation, challenging my very presence. In that moment, caught between terror and fascination, I understood the terrible truth: these toys were not just remnants of the past. They were sentinels of forgotten souls, guardians of childhood's fragile dreams, awakened by my arrival, and perhaps, hungry for something beyond mere observation. The warehouse, with its towering shelves and shadows that seemed to breathe, had become a prison of memories, each toy a frozen echo of laughter and lost innocence. But those animatronics, those unnatural sentinels, were something more. They weren't just relics of forgotten playthings, they were guardians of a past that refused to rest, actors trapped in an endless performance scripted by forces beyond human understanding. Marcus's flight from the building was not just a retreat from a physical space, but a desperate escape from a liminal realm where the boundary between life and the lingering remnants of forgotten souls blurred. The bear's gaze had pierced deeper than mere mechanics. It had seen him, acknowledged him, and marked him as part of an ongoing narrative woven through time and memory. Though days passed and the warehouse faded behind him, Marcus carried the weight of that silent encounter in his bones. The images of glassy eyes, faint mechanical movements, and the unspoken stories of those trapped within haunted his waking hours and invaded his dreams. The cold sweat, the tremors in his hands, the prickling skin, they were reminders that some places, some histories, resist erasure and demand to be remembered. And so, in the quiet moments between dusk and dawn, when the world slips into shadow and the familiar twists into the uncanny, Marcus feels the pull of that forgotten toy warehouse calling him back, not as an intruder, but as a witness to the unyielding dance between memory and the spectral echoes of childhood's fading light. The eerie silence that followed felt as heavy as the darkness itself. The two cowboys remained locked in their eternal standoff, unwavering and unblinking, as if waiting for a signal only they could hear. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out every other sound. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape this place where time seemed frozen and reality bent like heat waves on a desert road. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam trembling as I trained it on the television. The dust motes danced in the light, swirling around those lifeless figures as though they were surrounded by a spectral aura. The absence of my reflection gnawed at my mind like a persistent shadow, a cruel riddle refusing to be solved. What was this twisted space where my presence could be erased from a simple mirror-like surface? Suddenly, the radio crackled again, cutting through the silence with a burst of static, followed by a faint voice. It was old, grainy, like a broadcast trapped in the past, but the words chilled me to the bone. Stay, watch, never leave. The voice repeated in a haunting loop, growing louder, closer, as if emanating from the very walls of the diner. The temperature dropped rapidly, my breath turned to mist, swirling around me like ghostly fingers. The fluorescent lights above flickered violently, casting jagged shadows that stretched and recoiled with sinister intent. I stumbled back from the booth, nearly tripping over a fallen chair. The two cowboys on the screen seemed to shift, their eyes meeting mine in a gaze that pierced through the veil between worlds. Their frozen conversation now felt like a challenge, an invitation to step into their world, or be consumed by it. Heart pounding, I forced myself to look away from the television, searching for an exit, but the diner's door seemed miles away, swallowed by darkness. The flickering lights overhead buzzed louder, their strobe effect disorienting and unnatural. Time lost all meaning. I knew, then, that this wasn't just an abandoned diner awaiting demolition. It was a trap, a portal, a resting place for memories too stubborn to fade, and for spirits caught between fading echoes and forgotten dreams. And somehow, in that suffocating stillness, I knew my story was only beginning. Would I escape this haunted liminal space? Or was I already part of the tale told by the flickering lights and silent cowboys? Only the night held the answer. A cold dread gripped my chest, squeezing tighter with every echo of those spectral spurs. The laughter was gravelly and slow, like dry bones scraping together in a forgotten grave. I slammed my shoulder against the door, but it held firm, as if the very air around it had frozen into an impenetrable barrier. Panic clawed at my throat, my breaths coming in ragged gasps, visible in the frigid air. The booth's glow intensified, bathing the entire diner in an eerie pale light. The two cowboys rose from the table, moving with a jerky, unnatural grace. The taller one's eyes burned brighter, those fiery orbs locking onto mine with a hunger that transcended time. His companion's fingers stilled mid-shuffle, the cards hanging frozen in the air like talismans of a cursed fate. The temperature plummeted further, my bones felt as if they were turning to ice. The laughter now swirled around me, wrapping in a spectral embrace that pressed into my very soul. The television flickered, the screen distorting, revealing not just the diner's interior but flickering images of long-ago patrons, faces blurred by time, their smiles twisted into silent screams. A voice, deep, hollow, and dripping with menace, whispered through the static, threading through the laughter, "Play, or stay forever." I knew then this was no mere haunting. It was a trap, a spectral game where the stakes were not chips or cards but my very freedom. The cowboys, once men bound by life and death on a lonely highway, now puppeteers of a sinister dance, sought a player to join their endless game. With trembling hands, I scanned the diner for any escape, any window, any crack in this otherworldly prison. But all paths seemed swallowed by shadows, the exit sealed by the chilling frost and the oppressive will of unseen forces. Summoning every ounce of courage, I met the taller cowboy's blazing gaze and whispered, "I won't play." The laughter shifted, a low, rumbling growl vibrating through the walls. The cowboy's eyes flickered, momentarily losing their fire, replaced by something ancient and sorrowful. For a breathless moment, the weight of decades pressed down, a tragic story buried beneath layers of vengeance and despair. But the chill returned with renewed vigor, and the spectral game resumed its silent countdown. I knew my fight for escape had only just begun. The diner was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a gateway to a realm where time was a loop, shadows whispered secrets, and the price of a lost soul was paid in eternal play. And I was the newest participant. A shiver ran down my spine as I crouched beside Max, trying to break the invisible hold that gripped him and the others. I whispered his name softly, brushing my hand along his fur, hoping to stir some sign of recognition or comfort. But his wide eyes never flickered, his body taut like a drawn bowstring. The silence was suffocating, oppressive, broken only by the faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the wall the dogs were so fixated on. I turned my head slowly toward the source, heart hammering in my chest. The once pristine wall now seemed to pulse subtly, shadows shifting beneath the surface like dark veins or whispered secrets crawling beneath fresh paint. The rhythmic tapping grew louder, echoing through the corridor like a summons, drawing me deeper into a place I feared but could no longer ignore. Each dog remained statuesque, a collective witness to whatever lurked beyond that boundary of light and shadow. It was as if their instincts recognized something beyond my comprehension, a presence that commanded reverence or dread. The coldness of the air intensified, making my breath visible in quick, desperate puffs. I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me, watching from the darkness beyond the wall. The feeling wasn't just in my mind, it was a tangible force pressing against my skin, chilling my blood. I forced myself to stand, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. I had to understand what held the dogs so captive. Was it a haunting? A malignant force? Or something tied to the shelter's past that refused to be forgotten? As I stepped closer, the tapping suddenly ceased, replaced by a low, almost mournful hum that resonated through the concrete walls. The dogs shifted minutely, their eyes still locked in unblinking terror. I knew then that this was no ordinary haunting, it was a sorrowful watch, a silent vigil held by these animals, tied inexplicably to that wall, to whatever haunted shadow beyond it. And I was the only human witness caught between two worlds, one living and one waiting. In the depths of that cold, painted surface, secrets waited. Secrets that the dogs knew and I had yet to uncover. Through the small window in the door, the kennel area appeared unchanged at first glance, rows of cages, the fluorescent lights flickering faintly, and the dogs still pressed into the corners, eyes wide and unblinking. Yet beneath that surface, the air vibrated with an unspoken tension, as if the very walls held their breath, waiting. The darkness beyond the cracked wall seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a malevolent presence that had been pressing against its prison for who knew how long. My mind reeled from what I'd seen and heard, the scratches, the tapping, the breathing so vast it threatened to swallow the entire room. The dogs, though still, no longer felt like mere animals. They were sentinels, guardians against whatever lurked just beyond the wall's fragile boundary. Their terror was no instinctive fear, it was a recognition of something ancient, something hungry. I sat there on the cold floor, chest heaving, sweat cooling on my skin, caught in the terrifying stillness. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, a living thing in itself. Then, faintly, I heard a soft whimper, almost a whisper, and turned to see Max slowly rising from the corner of his run. His eyes met mine, no longer wide with panic but filled with a silent, knowing sorrow. In that moment, I understood, this was no ordinary haunting. The shelter was a liminal place, a threshold between worlds where the living and the trapped coexisted in uneasy balance. The dogs were both prisoners and protectors, tied to this space by a force older than memory. I didn't know how long I stayed on that floor, locked in a silent vigil beside Max. When I finally stood and forced my legs to carry me back toward the exit, the heavy weight of what I'd witnessed settled deep into my bones. The shelter's doors swung open easily, the night air sharp and biting. I glanced back once, and for a fleeting moment, the painted white wall didn't seem so empty after all. The scratches gleamed faintly under the moonlight, and the darkness beyond seemed to pulse, waiting for the next visitor brave, or foolish, enough to cross the threshold. I walked away with a new understanding. Some places don't just house the living. They hold the echoes of what was lost, the trapped souls who still watch, still wait, and the guardians who stand silent, bound forever to a wall they cannot escape. The words swirled around me, fragmented but heavy with intent, time slipping, unfinished business, the balance must be restored. The deeper voice, calm but resolute, urged action, the higher voice pleaded, desperate but bound by some unseen chain. Their discussion was no longer mere conversation, it was a summons, a judgment passed in the silence of an ancient, haunted house. I wanted to flee, to tear myself away from that room and never look back, but my body betrayed me. My feet felt rooted to the floor, my heart pounding in tandem with the whispered urgency. The footprints outside the window seemed to glow faintly in my mind's eye, a spectral trail leading me toward a destiny I hadn't asked for. My phone buzzed sharply in my trembling hand, breaking the spectral grip of the voices. The recording was still silent, mocking me with its stubborn denial of what I'd just heard. I realized then that the house existed in a fold between realities, where sound and sight blended, but technology could not reach. I leaned heavily against the doorway, breath shallow, eyes darting to the window once more. The condensation was beginning to fade, as if the house itself was erasing evidence of its spectral visitor. Yet in the shadows, I felt their presence, the watchers, the callers, the lost souls entwined in a conversation that stretched beyond my comprehension. I whispered my own name into the dim hallway, a fragile declaration of self amid the ancient voices. The house responded with a low, mournful sigh that seemed to come from the walls themselves, a breath of forgotten sorrow and endless waiting. The night stretched onward, a tapestry woven of silence and whispered warnings, and I understood with piercing clarity that this mansion was not mine to decide the fate of, it had chosen me first. Outside, the wind rose with the sound of distant waves, and the ocean beyond the cliff murmured secrets known only to the shadows. And deep within the house, the voices continued, waiting patiently for the next moment I might step fully into their world, surrendering to the echoes of the past and the weight of unfinished stories. Beneath the weight of ancient walls and whispered legacies, I had glimpsed the delicate balance between fate and free will, a dance as old as time itself. The mansion, with all its shadows and secrets, was less a prison and more a crucible, testing those who crossed its threshold. That night, as I drove away under the veil of stars and the steady rhythm of crashing waves, a quiet resolve settled within me. The power to choose, truly choose, was a light piercing through the thickest darkness. It was not escape born of fear, but liberation born of awareness. The house remained behind, its secrets held in silence, waiting for the next soul to stand before its inscrutable presence. And when that time came, I knew the choice would be theirs, to embrace the shadow, or to step into the light with open eyes and an unyielding heart. In the end, it is the courage to see clearly and decide consciously that shapes our paths, even when the world around us bends and twists in ways we cannot fully understand. And in that courage lies the truest freedom.